Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is my show early in the morning. I got to be honest with you, I am dragging ass this morning. I probably look like I'm dragging ass this morning. Hopefully, this will work itself out all the way through the show. I have my coffee. I'm hoping it does the job. I need an espresso machine. You know what's wild? The other place that I was staying at before I moved to this one, it had a coffee maker. I used the hell out of that coffee maker. Oh, I used the hell out of that coffee maker. And I am deeply missing. See, that's the thing. Like when you're uprooted, the stuff that you get very accustomed to, you miss because you put it there for a reason. And so you use it. When my wife and I were in Europe, ex-wife, we saw in Europe that they were using these water steamers. That was not something that we use in the US. We immediately got one. Those things come in handy for so many reasons. They're so good. You miss that stuff. It takes 5 minutes for a microwave to heat up water for coffee, whereas that thing was like 30 seconds. I'm complaining about stuff that don't matter. But nevertheless, fantastic show planned for today. Fantastic show. Demetri Lascaris is going to be here at 7:30. Esteban is going to be here at 8:15 or 8 a.m. I think it's 8:15. 8:15. No, 8 a.m. He's going to be at 8 a.m. And Michael Maloof will be here at 9:45. So a damn good show. And we are fortunate to have Maloof to break down the talks. It's funny, Mark preempted them because Mark's thing was like, okay, people need to calm down. We understand that they're talking, but they're not just going to work out a deal in the way that I think Trump may want. Where Trump is like, yeah, he shoots the shit for, 2 hours or 2.5 hours. And then they just work everything out. And everybody walks away. They did say, though, that they agreed on the basic premises of the deal. And if that's true, Ukraine is going to have to give up the goods. If that's true. And I do suspect it's true. I don't think Trump cares about Ukraine. I just don't. I think he wants to get out of it. I think he looks at it as a quagmire that he needs to extricate himself from. And he is stuck with various factors around the globe that for the last 3 years had been in full war mode. And it's so in full war mode that they can't pull themselves back from the cliff. And so you get Starmer and Macron say, we're going to put troops in Ukraine. They're doing this to try to kill any deal that Trump comes up with, which is the exact reason why those goofballs, those gang of idiots, are outside of negotiations. It's a reason why Kellogg is over there babysitting them, as opposed to them being part of the negotiations. Kayla's, or whatever her name is, said as much. We need to get into the negotiations because we are not part of them currently. Trump and Putin have their phone call. The phone call apparently goes favorably to both sides. And to give a diplomatic fig leaf to Trump, Putin agrees on a limited ceasefire on energy targets. I won't hit your oil refinery. You don't hit my oil refinery. Small concession. There was another one with the Black Sea. Now, they are supposed to continue the peace process, which, as I will point out, is what the Russians wanted anyway. The Russians were not going to stop their military advance just because Donald Trump and Putin talks. Why would they do that? They were going to proceed with their advance, putting pressure and more pressure on the Ukrainian military as they talked with the U.S. in regards to how do we end the war. The Ukrainian military would get weaker and weaker. They would get pushed back further and further. And those talks would get more hysterical. Maybe from the Ukrainian side, they would get more hysterical. And a sweet spot might be reached where the Russian military is like, all right, we're good. We don't want West Ukraine anyway. We can stop here. And they sign a deal with somebody who at that point, ideally, would represent legally the Ukrainian government. They are not stopping their military advance, is my key point. Is my key point. But they would agree on a limited ceasefire to give Trump a fig leaf. And that fig leaf is we won't hit energy structures or energy systems. There was one more, something with the Black Sea, that they also won't go against Black Sea targets while they continue the peace process. Ukraine violated this immediately. Ukraine violated this immediately. So right here, this is RT presenting this, but I just want to point out they violated this immediately for a reason. It wasn't just random. It's like, okay, you want us to agree on no energy targets. All right, this is what we think of your peace negotiations. The Ukrainian military has attacked an oil transfer facility in Russia's Krasnodar region that serves as an international pipeline for operational partially owned by American investors. The Defense Ministry in Moscow announced on Wednesday. U.S. President Donald Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin on the phone for more than 2.5 hours, with the two leaders announcing progress on the path towards a truce in the Ukraine conflict. Moscow agreed to suspend attacks against Ukrainian infrastructure for 30 days. Ukrainian Vladimir Zelensky publicly endorsed the partial ceasefire. Partial ceasefire. Violated immediately. Violated immediately. This is what we think of your ceasefire deal and agreement. We don't think much of it at all. And look, as we were pointing out before, Zelensky was going rogue and was backing away from, maybe we need more than 30 days. Okay, dude, you are trying to get back into Donald Trump's good graces. You endorse the ceasefire along with the gang of idiots in Europe, Trump's vassals. We love the ceasefire deal. And then you immediately go rogue, immediately back away from it, immediately point out, we are not going to accept territorial concessions. Okay, well, the reporting, high-level people in Ukraine are saying they are accepting that territorial concessions is going to be a reality. It's something they're just going to have to deal with and live with if they're going to get a deal, because at some point Trump may say, I'm done with it, I'm walking. I would tell you, if the U.S. works out a deal with Russia and it is presented to Ukraine and Ukraine says no, Trump may walk. It's not what he wants to do. You must understand. Meaning, it's not that this is what he wants to do. He wants to leave. It's not that. He wants to get a deal. He's the deal maker. He's the deal guy. And as the deal maker and the deal guy, he wants to get a deal. But if Ukraine is being ornery, and if they've gotten to the point of, we're not going to sign anything. We're not going to give up territory. We're not going to accept the Crimea. We're not. If he is pushed, he could walk. It's Trump. He would say, screw it. I did everything I could. And everybody in his political team and coalition will be saying and echoing the exact same thing to every media space that they can do. MAGA would say, great job. Donald Trump is finally leaving that SO country because they don't like Ukraine or Zelensky. They could do it. And he has the political backing to do it if he needs to. It's just not what he wants to do, which is my point. I'm just making a point of saying he will use that threat and he will go through with that threat if he needs to. Ukraine should know that. They should know that. So it's fascinating. I don't know if the administration is going to say anything about the fact that Ukraine just violated the ceasefire. Maybe they're talking to Russia saying, hey, calm down. But that's the other part to this. How can you make a deal with a man like this? How can you make a deal with a man like Trump? Fact is, they are violating the ceasefire right now with Israel. And you could say, okay, well, Israel is a special case. They wouldn't do that with the Russians. Okay, well, you've had Minsk 1 and 2 where the U.S. has already done that with the Russians. I played the clip the other day of Boris Johnson effectively pointing out Yeah, there was no way for Zelensky to actually go through with Minsk 1 and 2 because, the Nazis would have killed. How can you make a deal with someone that is as mercurial and a being generous, flagrant liar like Trump, being ungenerous for the moment? How do you do it? And how do you ensure that the deal is solidified and ironclad in a way that it is enforceable and that it is enforceable, unlike Minsk 1 and 2, or for that matter, the Istanbul Communique? How do you do it? Now, that was one of the things that Putin and Trump talked about also. Hey, we're open to the deal. We want to end this conflict too. Like Garvin said, you're in the mood for selling blue Hondas. Well, we want to buy a blue Honda. We're here. We have questions about the blue Honda, though. Does it have wheels? Has there been any accidents? How do we ensure that if in 30 days, 2 years, falls apart, we can, put it back together? Meaning, you have questions about how do you ensure that your interest is being met. And as Russia keeps saying, we want to ensure that the main reasons for the war are dealt with, which means that any negotiations have to deal with that. There's a way out the box. In one sense, I know a lot of people have been calling the 30-day ceasefire a trap. I think I did too. And it is on some level. The response to Putin, though, has put it in a better track. Because now it's not a 30-day ceasefire where everybody stops fighting. It's not that. It has been converted into something that I would imagine Russia would agree with. Hey, don't hit our energy systems. We won't hit yours. We've already damaged yours to oblivion, and we're going into the summer, so it matters less. I could be wrong on that. We'll get Maloof's point. But on top of that, what was a 30-day ceasefire is now we are in talks for long-term, let's say, resolution to the main reasons for the war. And this first talk that you and I had is paving a way to do that. So what was a ceasefire is now a 30-day ceasefire on a limited basis as we proceed with talks and negotiations to a long-term solution to the conflict. Meaning you're on a track for peace as the war progresses, without Trump screaming that the ceasefire is necessary for peace talks. You're in negotiations. The war continues. You get a limited win. That's politics, right? I told you, for me, some of this is theater, while real conversations going behind the scenes in regards to what do you actually want to end this? This is what I actually want to end this. Okay, we agree on those things. Now I need to get Ukraine and Europe on board for the things that we agree with. And there will be theater as we go about doing this, as I gyrate, because I need to look strong and I don't want to look weak as US president, as I go about sealing this deal. You have to move the pieces in a particular way to get them into a configuration where you can win. And they will say, we surrender, even though they won't call it a surrender. That's my take on what's going on. That's my take on the phone call between Putin and Trump. And also working on larger issues. Maybe they talk about Iran. They probably are talking about the Middle East. But again, that conversation, regardless of whatever else they're talking about, how do we carve up Ukraine? What do you want to seal this deal? What are the grand contours of it? Meaning, I think they're talking about contours. What are the boundaries? What are the things that you ultimately need? And Trump may have brought up Kursk, but again, that was a no-go. You're limited in what you can talk about in that conversation, even though you get a sense of where you're going in the negotiations. Negotiations will start immediately, I would imagine. I don't believe this is going to be a week. I don't believe this is going to be 2 weeks. But we'll see how it proceeds. It's a good thing that the principals are having a conversation. That is fantastic, especially if you go back to the Biden years. And again, from my point of view, you can't stop on a dime. It is very difficult to do that. Trump could have walked, but I just don't think it was ever in the cards for him to just walk. He said he was going to get a deal. He was going to solve it. Okay, walking is not solving it. So he's stuck with trying to solve it. But he's also stuck with a Russia that's pissed off, with Ukraine that has become hysterical, to put it mildly, with Europe that has lost its mind and is trying to start a third world war. The reason why I say that is this notion that ceasefire is great, and when we get to ceasefire, we'll put in troops. That is a tripwire. They know exactly what they're doing. They know full well Russia will never agree to any terms on a ceasefire. If indeed Europe is going to put in troops, those troops are immediately going to be targeted as a nose under the camel's tent, which is the reason why they're going to be targeted and killed immediately, with the idea that big brother America is going to come in to save Europe. What I'm hoping is Trump communicates to them is big brother America is not coming. You go in and you go in on your own. Whatever troops you put in that you are feeding into a Russian wood chipper, you are doing it knowing that we are not coming to your aid. Just be fully aware that that is the case. I strongly hope Trump is communicating that to him, because if they're not, those idiots are going to go and get killed. They're going to go get killed. They're going to be, okay, here's the first one. Who's number two? It's a wood chipper. America's not coming. It's going to be that. At least that's what I hope Trump is strongly communicating to them, so they know perfectly well you're on your own. Now, when Trump turned to Starmer, you could take on the Russians, and everybody in the room laughed. You'd have thought that that would have been Starmer's heads up to not do that. But I want to bring on my guests. I am over the moon to be joined by Demetri Lascaris. He is a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Demetri ran for leadership of the Green Party in Canada. How you doing, my man? You doing okay?
I'm doing well, and I really appreciate your very kind remarks. Great to be with you.
Man, I love having you on, and I followed you for a while and do appreciate it. Thank you for joining me. I want to start with the Putin call first, and I want to move to what's taking place in the Middle East. Give me your take. Liberals have been fascinating to me on this issue of Trump trying to restore diplomatic relations with Russia and making real moves in doing so. Like, he's serious about it, or he comes across being very serious about it. They recently had the phone call yesterday. And again, the phone call came across positive. They spoke for 2.5 hours. Give me your take on the moves that Donald Trump is making here. He seems to be genuine with it. Do you think he's going to be able to make progress on it in the way that he seemingly wants to make progress on this against a political establishment that for the last 3 years has been whipped up into a war fervor, and Europe still is?
Well, I want to be just to make sure I understand your question. When you say, is Trump sincere about these initiatives, are you referring to Ukraine, or are you referring to
Ukraine? In this case, I'm referring to Ukraine. I'm saying he does seem sincere. I guess my question is, do you think he's going to be able to make movement on this, considering Europe is doing everything in its power to stop it? There's a political establishment in the United States that does not want it. And Ukraine seems to be going rogue by just attacking the energy structure, which effectively violates the ceasefire that Donald Trump apparently worked out in that phone call. And you get various sectors walking back anything that the U.S. says. We're not going to give up territory concessions. We're not going to give up Crimea. We're going to continue that stuff, despite the fact that Trump and Putin have effectively agreed upon the majority of whatever is going to happen in any kind of deal.
Yeah. I had a discussion with a guest came on my show way back at the very beginning of the second Trump administration. It seems so long ago, where we talked about this very issue. And I think it was Alex Craner, actually. And I suggested to Alex that ultimately Trump's only useful role would be to sign the articles of capitulation.
Right.
And I went on to express the view, which I feel more convinced about now after having seen this circus for 2 months than I was then, that Trump, I think he genuinely wants to bring the war to an end, not because he particularly cares about Ukrainians or Russians. I really don't think he gives a damn about them.
I
I
agree.
think, yeah, but there's a lot of money being pumped by the United States into this. The United States and Trump in particular are very concerned about the rise of China. They've been very clear that they want to pry Russia away from China.
Mhm.
And, ultimately that would, in their view, enhance the whole project of containing China, weakening China. So I think for those reasons, he would like to bring the war to an end. But the problem for Trump, even more so than the deep state, is his own character. Trump is just obsessed with the idea that he's a winner. He cannot be associated with defeat. And there is no way in which you can get the Russians to stop prosecuting this war on terms that do not constitute a defeat for NATO. They've been very clear. You have to accept, you, the West, and Ukraine will have to accept that those 4 oblasts in Crimea now belong to us. You'll have to take Ukraine out of NATO. You'll have to demilitarize the country, and you will have to denazify the country. If they accept those terms, it will be crystal clear to the whole world that NATO has been strategically defeated.
Yes.
And Trump will be the person upon whom they will hang that defeat, and he knows this.
So
So I think
just interrupt for a moment. They
Sure,
will hang
yes.
that defeat on Joe Biden. Trump, he is going to hang that albatross on Joe Biden. I'm telling he is not going to accept that that's defeat. Trump is going to say, well, they wanted to take all of Ukraine and I prevented it. And he may get some fig leaf from Putin that he is going to run with. It's a defeat for NATO, yes. I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'm sorry to interrupt. I shouldn't have interrupted.
No problem. You're making an important point. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was my point. I'm finished. That was my point.
I know what he'll try. I totally agree with you. I think he will try like hell to say, I'm just here to clean up the mess that Biden created.
Yep.
And this is the best deal we can get. And of course, he'll try to say, we also got some business transactions out of this. American corporations are going to go in there and make a killing and blah, blah, blah. I know he'll try that. But I think he's really struggling because he knows that there's going to be a counter narrative. It's already out there. You can see it. The corporate media and the deep state and the warmongers and the NATO aficionados are all characterizing Donald Trump as a Putin puppet and weak. And just this morning in Canada's go-to newspaper for the political elite in this country, it's a newspaper called the Hill Times. It's kind of like Canada's version of Politico. There's a cartoon by their resident cartoonist, which just makes a complete mockery of Trump, makes him look weak and defeatist and a Putin agent and so forth. And he had to deal with this narrative, Donald Trump, for his entire first administration. He was hammered senselessly with this nonsense that he was a Putin puppet. And I think he's mortally concerned about this. And he's kind of flailing around right now. He's trying to find a way to get the war stopped, at least on a temporary basis, but without making any meaningful, serious concessions to Russia, because he's made none. He's talked a good game, but what has he actually conceded? Has he come out and said, we are prepared to commit in writing, in a formal treaty, that Ukraine will never be a member of NATO? He hasn't said that. He's made assurances. He's given verbal assurances, but he hasn't actually committed in writing in a legally enforceable way to do that. And of course, when it comes to recognition of these territories, rather than saying outright, yes, we will recognize your jurisdiction over these territories, he keeps saying both sides are going to have to make territorial compromises. And Russia's been very clear they're not making any. So my personal view, Jamal, is that he's kind of flailing around. He's caught between a rock and a hard place. And at the end of the day, I think what's going to happen, sad to say, is that this war will be continued to be prosecuted until a total military collapse and a regime change in Ukraine. And then no one will have any choice about it at that stage.
I can see where you're coming from. I can see that. I don't think at this stage where they haven't even begun negotiations, like in the realest sense of the word, of having people sit down and prosecute what they're trying to accomplish. And I don't think you're going to get that stuff from a president without that process. I don't think the Russians even expect that at this point. So I do accept that. Fair enough. I agree there's a counter narrative that's taking place. There's a scene in Game of Thrones where this little one, I can't think of his name, but he tells them the bastard, like they call him the bastard. And he says, you own it and you turn it into armor. Like you own that stuff. Donald Trump was hit with that stuff for 4 years straight, even to the point of them trying to take down his presidency. I don't think he cares. I don't think he cares what Europe thinks. I don't think he cares what Canada thinks. He is mocking the hell out of Canada right now. Governor Trudeau, in the way that he was calling it, said Trudeau came there and cried, meaning he has berated European leaders and Canadians for the entire 3 months or 2 months he's been in office. I don't think he cares about what Canadians and Europeans think. When JD Vance was talking to Maria Bartiromo, and he was talking about taking Greenland, and he was like, Europe will scream, we don't care. He said it flat out, we don't care what Europe thinks. We're taking Greenland. I'm saying I accept that the counter narrative is out there. I don't think he cares. He has had to deal with that for the last several years. What Trump cares is, what does his base think? What does America thinks? And what his base says is he should just walk, meaning they don't even want him to negotiate. That's where they are. So whatever he gets out of Ukraine, they would accept, they would approve. The counter narrative be damned. So that's the political context in the United States. And within that context, as you point out, he doesn't care about Ukraine. I think he wants to leave it. He considers it Joe Biden's mess. And if he has already, in theory, agreed with, okay, political territory. And by the way, we don't know what Putin ends up with as the Ukrainian military gets weaker. There may be areas where he's like, yeah, you can take it back, but we're keeping this. This is part of the Russian Constitution. This other stuff, okay, fair enough, you can take that. And Donald Trump can run away with saying, okay, I stopped Putin from taking all of Ukraine, which was never an objective, by the way. It was something that Europe said was an objective. That was never true. It was purely propaganda. He can take the propaganda, though. He can live in it. And he can say, I stopped them from taking all of Ukraine. Yes, Putin is getting these areas, but I stopped them from taking all of Ukraine. And maybe we can make deals around other stuff, around issues of NATO. I agree with you, but I think I am more cautiously optimistic. I'll say it that way.
Okay. So I have a question for you.
Yes.
And I know this is your interview, and I'm sorry to sound
no,
like
please, ask, go for it.
But and your perspective is entirely plausible. I mean, we're kind of trying to understand what's going on in the head of the orange-haired man, which is challenging,
right?
Ask in the best of circumstances. But how do you explain the fact that Trump is continuing to arm Ukraine and provide it to battlefield intelligence? If the man didn't care, he would. It seems to me he would just cut all of that off and bring this sucker to an end right now, because that's what would happen, and he could still claim, I stopped them from taking all of Ukraine, because at this stage, Russia would not be advancing on Odessa. It wouldn't be advancing on Kharkov. It wouldn't be advancing on Sumy. It would take the 4 oblasts in Crimea and call it a day, assuming they also agree to no NATO membership and demilitarization and so forth. He could make all of those claims, but he's not doing what's necessary to bring it to an end and stop the killing, which is to end the military supplies and the provision of intelligence to Ukraine. So what is your view about why he continues to do that?
Because you want chips on the board. If the Ukrainian military collapses, that's it. Also, while I don't think he entirely cares about Europe and Canada screaming that Trump gave the farm away, if you do that, they're going to say Trump's fault. Even in the US, they would say Trump's fault. Trump stopped the weapon shipments. Because do you remember when the Republicans, I think they were in a debt fund, and they refused to give Joe Biden the money for more weapons to Ukraine. I think it was for like a month or two. And all of the headlines were like, Ukraine is failing because the Republicans aren't giving them weapons and money, despite the fact they were just getting beat on the battlefield. The same refrain will come out of the US, and they would just say Trump walked away. Because if he does that, that is considered him just walking away. That's not him getting a deal. That is him walking and flailing out on Ukraine. I think that from his point of view, A, he wants to look strong. B, I agree with you. A U.S. president doesn't want to look weak, despite the fact that they've been beaten. NATO has lost in Ukraine. There's not much you can do with that. You're stuck with that. And so he is trying to look strong in the context of that. I think that as a U.S. president, it is hard to do that. I really do. I think he wants a negotiation and wants it to come to terms, and believes that if he stops shipments, A, he's going to get blamed, and B, the Russians going to take it. I don't know. Look, I agree with you, right? I want him to just stop the weapons, just call it a day, just walk. I'm sick of this, right? End this war, resume diplomatic relations. But I do think you have to work between the lines as a US president. And it's not like the support and intelligence has helped them win a war. They fundamentally lost it, and they're getting weaker on a 2,000 kilometer front, and they're getting routed and cursed. And the entire world sees it. They've lost.
Yeah, all I'll say in response is that he would still have leverage, even if he stopped the provision of weapons and intelligence. He would still have sanctions. And that means something to Russia. It's not like it's meaningless. Yes, they've managed to cope with it, but I'm sure they'd much prefer not having sanctions on them. And so he still has leverage. He can still extract some kind of benefits from Russia. He doesn't have to continue prolonging this war, prolonging the killing, and continuing to, there is a risk that this will escalate at any point in time. True. Things can get out of hand. It's very dangerous what he's doing, and it undercuts his stated goal, which is to stop the killing. Yeah. The more weapons he gives, the more intelligence, the longer the killing will go on, and the more territory Ukraine will lose. So I hope you're right. I would love to see all of this. Maybe he's got some master plan, and this is the best that he can do in the circumstances. And ultimately, it will bring the war to an end sooner rather than later. But I just don't see that any real progress is being made, Jamar. What they came out of their 2.5-hour conversation with yesterday. Okay, we're going to stop attacking Ukraine's energy grid for 30 days. Big deal. I mean, big deal. That's not going to accomplish anything in terms of bringing this war to an end.
Yeah, it's a fig leaf. It is. And Ukraine violated it immediately. Just violated immediately. Yeah. Like, just making a statement. We don't agree with this process. We're not on board for this. Yeah. But yeah, just an experiential show of distaste, right? Yeah, that's just wow. I woke up this morning, I read, it's like, Ukraine has violated the minimum limited ceasefire that they agreed upon. Oh,
but
man.
I think this is exactly why giving them weapons and intelligence is wrong. It's the wrong approach, because they don't have any incentive to. As long as they're getting weapons and intelligence from the U.S., why should they respect even that puny little ceasefire? Yeah. The only thing they really care about is give us the money, give us the weapons, give us the intel, and then they'll do whatever they want as long as they have that assurance. And Trump has given them that assurance, unfortunately.
I guess the question is there a consequence for them breaking the ceasefire? I mean, does Trump even acknowledge it? And if he doesn't, this kind of gets the Russians' point of, okay, how can we trust you? Like, we agreed upon a 30-day ceasefire. Zelensky agreed upon it, and they violated it immediately. How can we agree with and deal with you in these terms? And just to change over to another issue, Israel has gone on a killing spree and has violated, well, they were violating the ceasefire from jump. They never really believed in the ceasefire. Donald Trump came into office with this quote-unquote ceasefire. And I think the details behind it is that they only did this to get the hostages back, but they never really agreed on it. They considered it temporary. And the moment that they got the hostages back, it's like, okay, now we're going to resume because we have other objectives we want to accomplish. And of course, the U.S. is not complaining about it. They're not screaming at Israel about it. They effectively let Israel violate that ceasefire all the way through, with Hamas pointing out, hey, you're not fulfilling the obligations and the terms of this deal. You're not bringing in the humanitarian supplies in the way that you said you were going to do. You are breaking the deal. And Israel not caring one iota. And at this point, opening up a killing spree. I think yesterday they killed more than 400 people. I haven't seen the numbers today, but they effectively resumed killing and murder operations in Gaza. Yeah. Give me your take on this. I mean, this is a betrayal to the Muslim community when Trump looks them in the eye and says, I'm going to end this war. And it resumes a genocide that has been going on for 2 years with the world watching. And I think that's the most jarring part of this. It's not their gas chambers somewhere in Poland that nobody sees because they're in the middle of nowhere. We are on social media watching this day after day after day for 2 years. That is a mind. You know what I mean? Like, it desensitizes you to something that you shouldn't be desensitized to. Give me your take on this, just the entire process that is taking place.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, Jamal, this is part of the reason why I'm skeptical about Trump and Ukraine. I realize these are two different wars, different set of geopolitical considerations and so forth, but his behavior with respect to the Palestinians, the Yemenis, Iran, and so forth is such a warmongering, brutal, dangerous, violent approach that I have deep skepticism about that man's peace credentials in any part of the world. But
Yeah.
let me turn specifically to what's happened here. You know, as you mentioned, the Israelis throughout the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, were killing Palestinians. They killed well over 100 Palestinians during this period of time. The Israelis also, as you mentioned, were not putting in sufficient humanitarian supplies. They were supposed to let in at least 500 trucks a day. I don't think there was a single day where that happened. You know, Hamas continued pretty much throughout this period to release the hostages it agreed to release, despite these consistent violations. There was one period where the humanitarian aid got so low that Hamas paused the release of hostages, which elicited a massive threat. But at the end of the day, they ended up releasing those hostages. The thing that really caused finally where Hamas said, we're drawing a line, is that on the first day at the end of the first phase, 6 weeks after the ceasefire began, Israel was supposed to start withdrawing from the Philadelphia corridor, which is this 1 kilometer deep, 14-kilometer long strip of land along the Gaza-Egypt border. And this is very important to the Palestinians for, amongst other reasons, the fact that this is the entry point for humanitarian aid from Gaza, and they wanted to have control of that. And so that was the red line. And at that point, they said, we're not going to release any more hostages unless and until you withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor, as you agreed to do. By the way, are you still there, Jamal?
Yes, I just gave you the main screen. I'm sorry. No, you're fine. I just gave you the main screen.
I had some problem with my internet connection. That's why I'm sorry.
No, you're perfectly fine.
So I mean, the extent of, you know, sort of forbearance and, you know, flexibility that the Palestinian militants have shown throughout this period is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. So Israel comes along and just says, you know, we're not going to withdraw. Whatever we may have agreed to, we're not going to withdraw. They basically tore up the ceasefire agreement entirely that they had been, you know, consistently violating on a smaller scale every single day of the agreement. And Trump's reaction to this, this just blatantly using the ceasefire agreement as toilet paper, was basically to back Israel to the hilt. And what's really remarkable is he did this even after Hamas said, several days ago, it was reported that Hamas was prepared as a goodwill gesture to release the one living prisoner of war who's Israeli American and the bodies of 4 other Israeli Americans who died while they were in captivity. And Trump just said, no, you're making unrealistic or impracticable demands in exchange for that, without telling us exactly what those demands were. But I'm sure that the real sticking point was Hamas was telling them privately, Israel has to stick with its agreement to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, including the Philadelphia corridor. That's what Trump is calling impracticable. So at the end of the day, there is absolutely no indication, zero indication, that Trump, his administration, is serious about bringing this massacre, this genocide to an end. Yesterday was the biggest one-day death toll since the genocide began. That's how horrific a day it was. And Al Jazeera is reporting that they continue to kill people throughout the night. I think another 27 people in Gaza were killed throughout the night. And at the same time as this horror show was revived, Trump began to bomb relentlessly Yemen. And the most amazing thing about that story is that the Yemenis hadn't even resumed attacks on Red Sea shipping. What they said was, if you don't resume the provision of humanitarian aid to the people of Palestine, we will resume the attacks. But they actually hadn't done it yet. They gave the Israelis an opportunity to do what they are required by international humanitarian law to do, which is to allow that humanitarian aid in. This isn't a concession by Israel. Israel has an obligation under international law to provide that aid as the occupying power. So all the Yemenis said was, if you continue to violate your obligations, and not just under international law, but under your ceasefire agreement, then we're going to resume the attacks. They didn't do it. They hadn't done it yet. And what does Trump do? He starts slaughtering Yemeni children. He starts slaughtering Yemeni women. I mean, this man doesn't have a peaceful bone in his body. That's what I see, Jamal. So, you know, I'm deeply skeptical about his seriousness about pursuing peace in any part of the world as a result of that.
that's the rub, right? Like the Yemen situation is solved by the Israel situation. They're directly related. And, Hamas has said over and over that they want a deal. It's just Israel never fulfills and lives up to the obligations of the deal. What do you think that they're trying to get out of this from the standpoint of Israel? Is this they're looking at it as, all right, we have a president in that is going to back us whatever we do. We can do anything and he'll back us. This is our chance to take it all. We're going to push these people out or we're going to kill them all. Meaning we're going to make the situation so inhospitable that no life can exist in the areas that we want to effectively take. And believing that Trump will back this in the West Bank and in Gaza. Is that what this is about? Because they don't seem to have any notion of a deal or peace in their lexicon, meaning Israel fundamentally is not on board for any kind of peace negotiations.
I think that's entirely what this is about. This is about the ethnic cleansing of historic Palestine. It has always been the objective. What they did over time was they steadily made life for Palestinians more and more unbearable, hoping that they would eventually just give up and leave. To their great credit, and I think it's one of the most extraordinary feats of collective resistance we have witnessed in our lifetime, is that even today, the Palestinians refuse to leave their land, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank. And they're prepared to die, down to almost the last person, in order to maintain their rightful hold on this land, which is sacred to them. So it got to a point where the Israelis said, well, making life unbearable for them is not working. We're just going to have to wipe them all out. And we have an opportunity to do that now. And over a period of time, with all the crimes they committed, there was never any accountability, never any retribution, no real consequences for Israel as a result of that. So they became increasingly more audacious, increasingly more aggressive and barbaric in the treatment of Palestinians. And all of this is just the inevitable consequence of their historic objective from the very beginning to take all of historic Palestine, and B, the total impunity that they've enjoyed. It was inevitable that it would come to this, which is an out-and-out genocide before the eyes of the world. And I don't think they're going to stop until there's an external power that stops them. It's not, or internal collapse. That's the other possibility, is that they could collapse internally for a whole variety of reasons.
What are those reasons? Because I've heard people make this argument before. I was having a conversation with, what is his name? Dan Kabalik. And he made that argument. He said, look, there are internal contradictions in the way that Israel operates, not to mention this notion of a genocide. You've created such bad will with the rest of the world. But also the number of people that left, this idea of how can it be safe if you're constantly at war? Like, what are those internal contradictions that may end this state? And I want to piggyback on that with, do you think there would be an external factor that would change this on the ground? Because up to this point, I haven't seen it. I've seen a lot of words come out of Arab states. I've seen shaking fists coming out of Turkey as it works with Israel to carve up Syria. So, and I know those are two different questions, but in one sense, what are the internal contradictions? And do you see any other state actor getting involved?
Yeah, I'll answer the second part of your question first, because it's the easiest one. I think I don't have any confidence whatsoever, nor should anybody, in the Egyptians or the Turks or the Saudis to come to the aid of the Palestinians. And I don't think that the Iranians are going to go to war, full-blown war with Israel, if they can avoid it. I think the way this might play out, however, is that the Israelis and the Americans attack Iran, and then Iran finally brings to bear all of its military power against the Zionist entity, and that will have catastrophic consequences for Israel. And not just for Israel, of course, for the entire region, including the Iranians themselves. But if the Iranians are forced to use the full power of their military by an attack, a joint US-Israeli attack, which may well happen, that could be the external force that finally brings about the destruction of Israel in its current form. Short of that, I think the best hope is that an internal collapse aided by, the resistance, and that there are many stresses right now which are tearing at the fabric of Israeli society and political unity. So you have, for example, this fight that's going on between Netanyahu and the head of Shin Bet. He wants to dismiss the head of Shin Bet. The attorney general has taken the side of Shin Bet, but the minister of justice has taken Netanyahu's side. He's trying to disempower the Supreme Court of Israel from
Right.
subjecting the laws of Israel to judicial review. You have people within Israel they've come to the realization that even though Israel may seem to have the upper hand in these battles, that Israel cannot really protect them. There's the failures on October 7th, the fact that the Iranians and Hezbollah repeatedly and successfully penetrated Israel's vaunted air defenses. The fact that they haven't destroyed Hamas after all of this time, and it remains a significant fighting force. Israel, the notion that Israel is a sanctuary for the Jewish people, I think, has taken a very severe hit over the last 16 months, and that's caused a lot of people to leave. This is having, very serious detrimental impacts on the economy and affecting the quality of life of Israelis. There are, massive increases in bankruptcies. The credit rating of the country is almost at junk levels. People have not returned to the north of Israel, despite the fact that the attacks of the Islamic resistance in Lebanon have ceased for the time being. So you add all of this up, the economic stresses, the cultural conflicts, the political conflicts. There's a lot of anger about the fact that they have basically destroyed the ceasefire, and now there are, these prisoners of war who will remain in custody of the Palestinian militants. And in fact, Hamas reported, I think yesterday, that one of them was killed in the bombardments that happened. I don't know whether that's true or not, but this type of thing is causing enormous anger in Israel. So this is a small country. I think that Hassan Nasrallah was actually absolutely correct when he said that Israel is weaker than a spider's web. The only thing that sustains it is massive military and economic support from the United States and other Western countries, and that power is on the decline. The United States and Western governments are losing their military dominance, their economic dominance, and ultimately that will have impacts on Israel as well. So I personally remain absolutely convinced, Jamal, that the Palestinian people will have freedom in my lifetime. The horrible aspect to all of this, I've never lost any, I've never lost any belief in that, and it's based, I think, on a cold hard assessment of the facts. What horrifies me and should horrify us all is how many people will have to die before they finally achieve freedom.
Yeah,
and that
getting to the point.
Be a much larger number than what we've seen thus far.
Demetri, thank you for this, man. I always appreciate these conversations. Thank you for the back and forth. I have asked everybody who deals with geopolitics their point of view on these negotiations because everybody has a different answer. And I'm fascinated by the fact that everybody has a different answer. Like nobody knows what is going on in Trump's mind or even like what is possible because it's been so like backwards for so long in regards to the way that the US and Russia is engaged. And so you got somebody who seems to be, okay, let's try to unravel this. And people are like, okay, is he serious? Trump lies a lot. Yeah, it's fascinating. Demetri Lascaris. He is a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, he ran for leadership of the Green Party of Canada. Demetri, where can people find you?
On YouTube, I have a YouTube channel called Reason to Resist, and you can find me on X and Instagram at Demetri Lascaris.
Very cool. Thank you for this, man. You be safe.
Take care, Jamal.
All right. Great conversation with Demetri. I really appreciated that. I love the back and forth on that. But I want to bring in my next guest. We are joined with Esteban Carrillo. He's an Ecuadorian journalist writing for The Cradle. He was previously with Tell Us English. Ecuador, Esteban, Jesus, couldn't get it out. Welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
I'm doing good, Jamal. Good morning, and hello to everyone who's joining us.
I'm curious. I'm going to ask you too. Give me your thoughts on the Trump Putin. Well, first, did you look into the Trump-Putin call? I know this is not why I brought you on.
A bit. I saw what I saw in the headlines, yes.
What did you think about it? Where's your mind with the whole Trump negotiation stuff?
I think it's good, obviously, right? That there's a diplomacy happening. Yeah. I think this is what we have been missing we're still missing, actually, right? It depends where you look at. If you look at Russia, Ukraine, seems that diplomacy is the name of the game. If you look elsewhere, it's not, sadly.
Not so much.
But I think it's a good step. I hope it leads to peace. I hope it leads to an end to that carnage. But I don't think it stems from an actual desire to see less bloodshed, to see less war, right? Trump, the peacemaker, and we'll get into that, of course, in a second.
Yeah.
I think, what we're seeing elsewhere kind of proves the point that whatever's happening in Ukraine is not because there's a desire for peace. Is more likely, just simply a desire to bury whatever the Democratic Party was getting out of Ukraine.
Yeah. No, I agree with you on that. Like, I don't think it's, I have a bleeding heart, and I don't think it's that. I think it's, we're sick of this war. I said I was going to end it. I don't care about Ukraine. I don't like Zelensky. I don't like these European, these vassal idiots in Europe and Canada. And I want to unravel this. My base hates it. My base wants me to just walk away. I want to end it.
Exactly.
That's what I'm going to do. I think it's that. Like, I don't think it's like this kind of, oh, I love Russia. I don't think it's that at all. Like, I don't think that's the basis.
I think there's respect. I would imagine that there is definitely respect there between, Trump obviously respects Putin. I think that's pretty apparent.
I think Trump respects strength.
At all. And,
I think he respects strength. And Zelensky, running around in a garbage man costume, begging people for money as a panhandler all over the place. Okay, well, that's not really strong. That's you being dependent upon us and pretending you're strong as you're completely dependent upon us. Europe has no hard power. So it's like, okay, dude, the only people who has chips in the game in real terms is Russia and America. Right? It's like Europe can't do anything on their own. They're begging America for a backstop. That's not what I'm about. It's just they are trying to start a third world war. And I want to point out how astonishing it is that Europe, after starting 2 world wars, is trying to start a third. What is wrong with Europe? Like, even America is like, hey, you guys need to show strength. And they're like, no, we need to fight the Russians. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? All right, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Trump, who, as you pointed out, is making these peace overtures on one side of the globe, in another sector of the globe, warmonger.
Yes.
He is giving green light to Israel. I mean, the reporting was he gave them a green light to effectively resume operations against Gaza. And again, we're talking about a green light after Israel violated the agreement over and over and over, never lived up to the agreement, where Hamas was like, let's move into the second phase. Let's stuck with the deal as Israel continued to violate it. And then Trump is like, yeah, go ahead, bomb the hell out of it. When it was Israel violating the deal, I'm trying to nail that part down, right? Because to give Israel a green light to go bombing after you've filled their coffers with weapons and missiles and bullets and everything else, and it was them that violated it, it's pretty outrageous, especially when you go to the Muslim community and say, hey, give me your vote. I'm going to stop the war. I'm going to stop the conflict.
Good point.
That's astonishing.
Very good point.
Give me your take on this. I mean, because he's also opened up a bombing campaign on Yemen while this is taking place with Israel going after Gaza. Give me your take on this.
Well, maybe to continue on the previous point about, I think it's very interesting what you said, right? That he's trying to appeal to his bases to his voter base by doing what he's doing in Ukraine, and at the same time, I feel like the whole media apparatus, the whole political apparatus in the U.S. is just at the service of the Israeli lobby, right? To no matter what Israel does in Gaza or elsewhere, there will always be justification. The justification today is that Hamas blocked the deal. Right? That's what all the Western media is saying across the board. They are conveniently forgetting that it was Israel who delayed the entry into phase 2 of the deal after, successfully completing phase 1, despite constant violations, despite not allowing enough aid into the Strip, despite not allowing any mobile homes, despite allowing a fraction of the tents that were agreed upon, despite killing dozens of Palestinians during the ceasefire. And now you have this expansion, right? This return to the war, which is what Israel has been angling for since the beginning. And then again, I feel like this brings into question what were the motivations at the beginning of the ceasefire anyway, because the ceasefire is achieved essentially before Trump comes into power. Right? He signed a couple of weeks after, but the ceasefire, the talks and negotiations, they become very serious even before he comes into power. And now it's the complete opposite. And I think this has been a constant in the second Trump government, which is, today I do one thing, the next day I do the complete opposite of it. We saw it with the tariffs. We keep seeing it with the tariffs, that they come and go every day, it seems. And now we're seeing it with Israel, which is, it's the golden child of the United States. At this point, you cannot convince me that there's a single politician in Washington that is not willing to completely bend over and accept what the Israel lobby puts forth, or whatever Israel's get ready to do in Gaza, where they already killed about 500 people in about 3 days, where doctors are saying anyone seriously wounded is going to die. There is absolutely no way to treat anyone who has any serious injuries. These people are going to die. Where, again, no food had been entering for over 2 weeks now, right? Even before this whole bombing campaign restarted, the food wasn't entering, water wasn't entering, electricity was cut off again. Genocidal act upon genocidal act, and with the cover, right? With the complicit cover of Western media. Now, as far as Yemen, Trump, what he's doing is he's intensifying what is an illegal war, right? What is happening in Yemen can only be described as that. This is an illegal war. This is U.S. Involvement in a foreign theater without congressional approval, right? U.S. troops deployed in the Red Sea, more aircraft carriers moving towards this area of operation, just by presidential decree, completely. And where is the U.S. Constitution? Where is the process? Where are laws? It doesn't matter. So Trump, what he's doing is just intensifying this campaign that Biden started, because Biden started in January 2024, and for a year, U.S. and UK warplanes bomb Yemen nonstop, hundreds of times, Israeli planes as well, in a few occasions. Doesn't achieve anything. They don't achieve anything. If the attacks in the Red Sea stop, it's because Yemen leaves the blockade when the ceasefire starts in Gaza. And then they announce the reimposition of the blockade once the ceasefire actually collapses, but once the aid is started to be blocked into Gaza. No attacks are actually launched into the Red Sea, but the United States begins bombing and killing civilians, killing women and children, bombing residential areas. And what does this do? It incurs the wrath of Yemen, who is itching for a fight. Like we have to say it, Ansar Allah and the Yemeni armed forces, they are itching for a fight. They are not about to back down, and their actions are not being dictated by anyone but themselves. This is not Iran giving the orders, or with the puppet strings. It's not. It's Yemen making their own decisions and deciding that what is happening in Gaza is wrong and that someone needs to do something about it.
Saudi Arabia and the United States has been bombing Yemen for over a decade at this point. It has done nothing to break their will, and they continue to do what they do, right? And I'm glad you pointed out this started under Joe Biden. Like, this is a continuation of Joe Biden's policies in the Middle East, and it makes me think that they don't have an answer. If that makes sense.
For
like,
Yemen?
I'm not sure. I know this is a show of strength, but I think it's a show of strength, or let's say weakness masquerading as strength. I don't think they have a clear solution for the Yemen thing. They can't invade, or at the very least, I don't think they want to invade. I don't think there'd be any political will for Trump to send troops into Yemen. I think it will be weird for an American public to be like, wait a minute, you've invaded a country? Like, that would be very strange.
Yes.
And so him and Joe Biden are stuck with very similar answers, which is why their foreign policy is looking very similar, which means they have no answers. Like, if you have, I hope that makes sense. Like, if you have two presidents who supposedly hate each other, come to very similar conclusions in regards to what they're doing as policy, that means that is the only answer they can come up with as policy that is viable in the space that they're in. So it's bombing of Yemen. So we're just going to do more bombing.
Or is the only answer that is being presented to them, right? By a particular interest group.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so for Gaza, okay, we need to push them out into Egypt. And for the West Bank, we need to push them into Jordan. Okay, well, that's not going to be accepted. I know, but that's the only policy that we have in this, because we have to do what Israel tells us to do in this. Or at the very least, we like that Israel is doing what Israel is doing. Is that what it is? Like, they just don't have any other answers?
Well, going back to to Gaza for a second. The restart of the genocidal war comes like days after Adam Boehler, the special hostage envoy, goes on CNN and says, we have a deal ready. I'm confident that we will get all the captives, that we will reach a complete truce. The US is not an agent of Israel, and Hamas, they're not these men with horns on their head, devils. They're actually pretty nice guys. He says all of these things in an interview, gets sacked like a couple of days after this.
Wait, just to be clear, was also doing back channel communications with Hamas.
Yes, this is after
Israel found out and outed the fact that he was trying to do back channel communications with Hamas. Exactly. Didn't like the fact that he was doing it because he didn't want the US to be in direct communications with Hamas outside of Israel.
Yes, they didn't want anything to threaten the return to war. That's it. That's simply it. And that was the policy from the beginning of the genocide, from the beginning of the ceasefire. It hasn't changed. Even today, right? There's mass protests ongoing in Tel Aviv and occupied Jerusalem by Israelis who don't want the internal intelligence chief, the Shin Bet chief, to be fired by Netanyahu because he's currently investigating failures in the Netanyahu government on October 7 and, well, corruption, because Netanyahu is an incredibly corrupt leader. When even if you remove everything else from him, he's still just like a corrupt leader who is being investigated. So a return to war is necessary, as we have said many times. Now he's reinstated Itamar Ben-Gvir into the government, this virulent Jewish supremacist former national security minister who was arming Jewish militias in the West Bank and telling them to go and, raid Palestinian villages. He's back. He's back in the coalition because he left, right? When the ceasefire started, he left. Right. He made a big show of it. Now he's back. Netanyahu is, again, closing the ranks around himself. So including the United States, right? It includes the United States is an agent of Israel. This is where Adam Boehler was wrong, and this is where I think any U.S. official, any U.S. politician who wants to take this stance, they're going to run into that brick wall. And I don't know how many more times they need to see it to start understanding, what interest the United States serves in reality in the Middle East, right? Elsewhere, maybe, right? We're seeing it in Ukraine. There's actually a door that can be opened and talks can be had and a peace can be reached. Now, the question is how much longer, right? Because I think how much longer is Trump going to fuel this? Because, as you said, he gets elected on a platform that is, I'm the peacemaker, right? I'm not going to send troops abroad. I'm not going to waste more money in fueling these wars that the Democrats were so happy to just keep alive. And, you have Elon Musk cutting budgets left and right, but the Pentagon is, suspiciously kept to the side, despite the fact they have never passed a financial audit, despite the fact that their budget is about to hit $1 trillion, despite the fact that they cannot account for trillions of dollars. They cannot account where all of this money has been going for decades now. Let's not touch them, right? This is what Doge and whatever Musk is doing has done so far. So now, I think. What is Trump's base going to say if he goes into Yemen, right? If more, because right now, as I said, there are more aircraft carriers headed to Yemen, and what this does, to the Red Sea, and what this does, it doesn't, it's not going to solve the Yemen problem. What it does, it gives Yemen more targets. Because Yemen in the past 72 hours has targeted the USS Harry Truman in the Red Sea at least 4 times with ballistic missiles.
And if he gets hit,
right? Like Houthis in the sandals with their, broken up pickup trucks, whatever, these racist stereotypes that are constantly going on in social media. The fact of the matter is, Ansar Allah has managed to hit Tel Aviv with drones and missiles. It has managed to target U.S. warships to drive out U.S. warships out of the Red Sea. At least 4 aircraft carrier groups and a EU mission. They sent them running away. And all officials that have given an interview that served in the Red Sea during the last year, they were talking about how this was an unprecedented battle, that this was the biggest naval battle since World War II for the United States Navy, that this was the Undersecretary of Procurement or some U.S. official in November, he gave this interview, And he was so frank about what happened in the Red Sea. He was saying, I have been around missiles my entire life. I'm a physicist, I'm this, I'm that. And in my however many years of service, I have never seen anything like what the Yemenis are able to achieve and what they put us through in the Red Sea. This is what Western officials were saying about Yemen.
Yeah.
So send more ships, but send more soldiers, send more sailors. What you're giving Yemen is more targets, because you keep bombing them, you keep bombing Yemen, you keep killing people, and yet they keep firing missiles, and yet they keep targeting your ships and targeting Israel. Yesterday, Israel shot down a Yemeni ballistic missiles. Remember, Yemen launched last year a hypersonic missile.
Mhm.
So no, there is no military answer to Yemen. Saudi Arabia doesn't have the answer. They were in war with Yemen for about 8 years, 7-8 years, and they couldn't achieve what they wanted, right? And this was when Ansar Allah was even weaker than they are now. And yet we saw attacks against Aramco facilities in Jeddah. We saw attacks against the UAE. We saw, there's the infamous picture during the F1 Grand Prix or whatever in Saudi Arabia, and you have in the background these fuel tanks on fire because Yemen has just bombed. This was what they were up against back then. In Yemen, there's been attempts also to revive Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is present in Yemen, which is present in UAE-controlled areas, but it doesn't seem to be catching fire because Yemen, they cannot apply the Syria strategy to Yemen, right? What they did in Syria. In Yemen, they can't, because first of all, the Yemeni people, they're essentially immune to propaganda. No matter what the United States says, no matter what Western media says, the Yemeni people are not buying into any of that. They buy into the strength of their own forces. And what the war, the genocide in Palestine, and the war that has been launched against Yemen, what they has achieved inside, is to bolster support for Ansar Allah, is to create more support. Last year, you had defections from the Saudi-led coalition, generals, commanders, defecting to join Ansar Allah, to join the Yemeni armed forces, because they were all saying, we're not going to be on the side of the Zionists.
Yeah.
What kind of shame would that bring on our name? What kind of shame would that bring on our family? So I'd rather defect. So again, what is the answer? I mean, there's an obvious answer. The most obvious answer is right there. And that is stop the Gaza genocide. Stop it.
Yeah, stop the war.
Exactly. Just stop it. What else is there to bomb in Gaza, Jamara? What else? There's nothing else to bomb in Gaza besides people.
That's right there. That's the other thing. What is the military objective in this? Like, what are they operationally? What are they trying to accomplish? As you say, there's nothing else to bomb. Like, what are you bombing? Tents? I mean, you've bombed all the schools, you've bombed the hospitals. There are no hospitals in northern Gaza. You've destroyed everything. I think it was something like 80-90% of the buildings were gone or destroyed.
Yeah,
like
80% are completely destroyed.
Right. So what are they bombing? I don't get I guess what I'm asking, and maybe this is a stupid question, what is the operational objectives of this continued bombing at this point?
It's the same as from October 7, 2023, destroy Hamas. Right, it's like in 2001, right? After the attack on the World Trade Center, the Congress passes this law, the 2001 authorization for the use of military force. And what does it say? This is to attack the perpetrators of the attacks.
Right.
Like, what does that mean? Who is it? Well, there's no country name, there's no group name, there's no person name. It's just like this very broad classification that to this day has allowed U.S. troops to go to war without authorization, without
your point is Hamas is so amorphous in the way that they see it.
So Israel
is they're, for all intents and purposes, just killing people. Exactly. That's the objective. It's just
because,
to kill.
You have seen for the past year and a half that when Israeli officials say Hamas, they mean Palestinians.
Yeah,
to them is interchangeable. The term is interchangeable. Yeah. So when we say that the military objective is to destroy Hamas, is to destroy all Palestinian life that is left in Gaza. And I think at this point nobody can argue against that.
I guess the question was somewhat imprecise. What I was trying to get at is this notion of end goal, end result. There are 1 million people in Gaza, 1.2 million. Okay, are they going to kill 1.2 million people?
That's what they want.
Because if that is not the objective, then what are you doing? Like that's what I'm trying to get at, right? Like
Yeah.
you are either trying to push out or kill all of these people, and that is a lot to stomach if you're trying to really kill 1.2 million people. And what that even looks like as you do and proceed with killing 1.2 million. And if that is not your objective, meaning if you can't accomplish that goal, then what are you doing? I hope that makes sense. Right. Like I'm trying to ask this question of like, what is the end goal? What is the end objective? If you can't
I'm
accomplish the killing of that many, and you can't push them out because Egypt and Jordan are not accepting them, then what are you doing?
it's ethnic cleansing, right? And because the attacks the past week, the past 3-4 days, they have killed at least 6 Hamas leaders, 6 Hamas political leaders. So again, this begs the question: how can negotiations take place when one side is killing the negotiators on the other side, right?
Yeah.
Imagine if Russia, right, if Russia starts killing
They killed Rubio.
Ukrainian negotiators, targeting them and their families. What would the Western media say about this? What would Western leaders, what would US politicians be saying if that happened? Because that's exactly what is happening currently as we speak in occupied Palestine. So, what is their end goal? Their end goal is to take the strip, control the strip, rebuild their settlements. This is the Israeli project, after all. And right now, it seems like doesn't matter who sits in the Oval Office. Israel's going to get what they want. But more importantly, at this point, Netanyahu is going to get what he wants: a wanted war criminal, right? Arrest warrants from the ICC against his name. He is getting everything. He's getting absolutely everything. This does beg the question: is this going to be forever? Is this going to be is there's not going to be any pushback from Trump's voter base? Which, let's be honest, a big chunk of them pro-Zionist, pro-Israel. But as you clearly pointed out, the Muslim American vote, right, that helped Trump achieve these goals.
Yes.
Well, they've been left on the side, and I mean, not even to go that far, right? What he's doing with the migrants, right? With the Latin American migrants, with the Venezuelans, like essentially kidnapping people. These were also people that supported Trump. These communities, the Cuban Americans, the Venezuelan Americans, etc. They also supported Trump, and now he's essentially criminalizing being a Latin American.
Yeah.
Is he gonna criminalize being a Muslim American too? I mean, he kind of is, right? With the Columbia University student, with this Lebanese doctor who was deported a few days ago despite having a work visa, being an assistant professor at Brown University. She just gets deported. Why? Because she has a few pictures of I guess Hassan Nasrallah on her phone.
Yeah, it's outrageous.
She gets
it is outrageous.
Despite a court order, right? This is the United States today. People are getting thrown out, either deported back to their country, thrown in jail in the US, or sent to jail in a different country, or even in Guantanamo Bay, violating court orders, right? You have judges come in and say, no, you can't do this. And they're like, well, sorry, the plane already left. What can we do? We're not going to do anything. This is the United States today.
This is so aggravating to me, because you would think that it's in Trump's best interest to ensure that the ceasefire remains, meaning it looks good for him for that ceasefire to remain intact. I'm the one who got this. I'm the one who's pushing for peace. I'm the one who's getting $100 million from Miriam Adelson has effects. And he has put in the most right-wing, batshit crazy Zionist organization that I have ever seen. And that they seem to be completely obsequious to anything that Israel does. Hamas had to know this, though, in any negotiation. Does this mean that they're working towards the deal because they need a deal? Like, I know that Blinken made the point of saying, well, Hamas has reconstituted its forces. I have a hard time believing that, especially in that short period of time. I believe they had manpower, yes. But how do they get the weapons? How do they get the materials to continue fighting, even though they are still putting up resistance? Is it that they needed a deal? And the fact that they're coming to negotiations because they need a deal, I think it's strengthening Israel's hand in a weird way, if that makes sense.
No, I think I mean, we need to look at reality, right? Like the reality is, like we said, Gaza is destroyed. Gaza,
Yeah.
if today there is an actual ceasefire and there is an actual pullout of Israeli troops and aid enters, etc., just cleaning the strip is going to take several years, right? Several years. At the very least, it's going to take 5 years if everything goes well. And after that, you need to think about reconstruction. And after that, you also need to think about the repercussions, right? Because the viciousness of the Israeli onslaught in Gaza is not just meant to kill people today; it's meant to kill people tomorrow, or in a year or 10 years down the line, right?
Yeah.
To make sure that there's no more babies born. This is a genocidal project. So of course, Hamas wants an end to this. Every Palestinian wants an end to this. Every person in the region, no matter where you stand on the spectrum, I think wants an end to what's happening. Hamas is, according to some reports, right, and when they were having the talks with the U.S., they were saying that they were even willing to give up leadership of the Strip.
Yes.
They were willing to allow the
Yes.
Palestinian Authority to come back, that they were willing to step down, but they weren't willing to give up their arms, right? They didn't want to do that. That was the big sticking point. And to answer your question about Hamas reconstituting its forces, as you said, manpower, yes, because what else are you going to create if you start killing people's entire families, if not resistance, right? If not resistance fighters. If you kill my entire family, not just my wife, kids, my extended family, my neighbors, my co-workers, I'm gonna be angry, and I'm gonna want. And I think that's just a human sentiment. This is not like a Palestinian or a Muslim or whatever other adjective they want to put in front of it. This is just a human thing, right? If you come after me in that way, I'm gonna have I'm gonna want my pound of flesh. So of course you have, as they kill Hamas fighters, you have a long line behind of new Hamas fighters.
Exactly.
As far as the weapons, Hamas at this point, as what is happening right now is mainly airstrikes. What is happening in the airstrip? Although there's been talks of plans for a new ground invasion, but Hamas is not really putting up a fight because they can't. They don't have air defenses, and I hardly doubt that they have any more rockets to be firing into Israel. So they're just sitting. They're sitting ducks in Gaza. Everyone. What they become a guerrilla force is what I'm trying to say. If Israeli troops come in, they're gonna be fighting a guerrilla war, like they did during the last months of the intense fighting in Gaza. So Israel just wants to kill as many people as possible. That's what their plan is, right? That's what the general's plan is that they were implementing in North Gaza. Kill as many of them as possible to make the population size more manageable, right? And then hopefully we will be able to get them out somewhere, right? We'll be able to get them into Egypt or into Jordan. As you said, there's been talks with Somalia. There's been talks with Sudan. There's been talks apparently with Syria as well. There's been talk with the breakaway republics in Somalia, with Somaliland and Puntland, I believe, from the US, from the UAE, because the UAE is lobbying against the Arab reconstruction plan for Gaza. The UAE doesn't want that to go through. UAE, a very close ally of Israel. So what is the answer then, right? Because all of these countries are saying no. They're saying no. And I don't think it's not because they wouldn't, like the leadership wouldn't be willing to accept this and whatever money comes attached to it. It's because of their population, right? Because you're talking about Muslim majority countries that would, no matter what, like I said in Yemen, right? No matter what conflict you are caught in, the moment an outsider comes and tells you take in all of these millions of Palestinians so that Israel can have Gaza, they're not going to flip out and say, no way. No matter where we stand, we're not going to accept that, right? It may be partly solidarity for Palestine, but I would say mostly just understanding what it means to take in 2 million people as refugees of war.
Is that true even for Syria, with Jolani basically a Western puppet, an Israeli puppet, Turkish puppet, in a sense, meaning he was put there with the help of Turkish and Israeli forces, and he is there now balkanizing Syria, where Israel has taken apart. Turkey is effectively in control of that government, despite Erdogan shaking his fists at Israel. Israel even came out and said, yes, we work with back channels with Turkish intelligence in this operation to take Syria. If they're in talks with Jelani, could they do that in Syria?
It would be a very interesting thing. It would be a very interesting thing because Syria has all of it, enough problems as it does, and I feel like the Jelani, the Jelani government probably doesn't want that pressure point, right? And it probably doesn't even want that to be out in the news that they may be having talks about taking in. But I feel like Jelani, his gang of thugs of mass killers. If Washington or Israel or Ankara say jump, they will say how high, no matter what. But I think so far the talks haven't reached a point in which this could actually become viable, because at the same time you have Israel bombing Syria, right? They just bombed Damascus a few days ago. They're supposedly in war. So how is that going to look on paper, right? Because at the end of the day, when they decide to move forward with this ethnic cleansing plan and try to push the Palestinians out, they're going to try to paint it as a humanitarian measure, right? That's what Western media is going to try to do, and that's what everyone is going to try to do. That's what Trump was trying to do, right? When he was saying like nobody wants to stay in Gaza, it's a demolition zone, etc. How can you paint it as a humanitarian measure when you're pushing people into, first of all, a country that you yourself, in this case Israel, is saying that is ruled by terrorists, that is ruled by ISIS, and second of all, you're constantly attacking. It's a country that you're constantly attacking and stealing territory from. So I don't think Syria is really, at the moment, the answer. I think there's hopes that maybe one of these African states is going to be the answer because in the case of Somalia in particular, I feel like Somalia is a very strategic asset for whatever they have planned for Yemen. Because they're just right there. The Bab el-Mandeb straight separates them. So this is why the U.S. and Israel are so involved there. But at the end of the day, honestly, I don't think any of these schemes are going to work. Like any of the ethnic cleansing of the forced displacement schemes, they're not going to work. They're not going to get very far. So I feel like we are headed towards a lasting ceasefire at some point. It has to be. It has to be, because if not, then what is Trump doing? Why is he calling himself the peacemaker? And maybe I'm putting too much stock into the words of a man who, today will say one thing and then the next day will take it back. He took back the whole displacement thing. Remember when he was meeting with the Irish Prime Minister, he said nobody's moving any Palestinians out of Gaza. So where do you stand? What do you stand for? What is the actual plan here?
I suspect he was rebuffed, just like Biden was rebuffed. No, we're not taking him. I don't care what you do, we're not taking him. As you pointed out, there are issues of the public that would be completely against it. So no, we're not taking all of these Palestinians, whether it's Jordan or whether it's Egypt. And so it's like you're stuck with this idea of, okay, well, what's the end goal? Either you're going to kill 1.2 million people, or you're going to do what, since you're not going to be able to push them out. And if you can't kill 1.2 million people, then what are you doing? Like, it's weird to me, and maybe weird is not the right word for it. As you pointed out, the general plan, we need to ethnically cleanse this area if we're going to take it. Or we need to make it so bad that somebody takes them, somebody accepts them. But I don't even know how that works with that many people. Like, this just, if they reach a ceasefire, and I guess my thing is, if you're going to reach a ceasefire at some point, why don't you reach it now? But that is not the way they're
exactly. Why do you need to bomb tent camps? Why do you need to bomb whatever ambulances or humanitarian groups are still in the strip? What is the military?
It's spite. It's purely out of spite. It's not. There are no military objectives in this case. It's out of spite, and the world needs to kind of accept that. Like, it's not. We're doing this because we're accomplishing an objective that has a military significance. We hate these people. We hate these people, and we're doing what we can do because we do hate these people. It's disturbing and very sad that we have locked ourselves on to this murderous regime as it goes about this genocide. One more thing on Yemen. I am fascinated by something that you said, because you're absolutely right. When people have an image of Yemen, they're thinking guys in flip-flops driving pickup trucks with, a shooter on the back.
Exactly.
These guys have been able to launch sophisticated missiles from there into Israel and hit Tel Aviv. They have been able to attack military convoys. That is not guys in flip flops. There's a military sophistication associated with a dirt poor country.
Mm-hmm.
How are they doing this? I mean, look, I suffer from those same delusions, even though I know what their military capability has been. How are they doing this? What support are they getting from Iran? How is Iran getting materials, if indeed materials are being sent to Yemen for them to do this? Or is this something that they built homegrown? I'm fascinated by their military capability and where this capability comes from.
I mean, first of all, what I would say is anyone who's listening and maybe is unfamiliar with Yemen's arsenal, go on Twitter, go on YouTube, anywhere, and search for images of the military parades in Sana'a of last year when Yemen was putting on display their missiles and their drones.
Yeah.
And it was just like it looks like something out of North Korea. It looked like something out of Russia. When they do their Victory Day parade, you just have these like missiles upon missiles and just drones upon drones. Yemen has been in a bloody war, was in a bloody war between 2015 and 2022, when finally a ceasefire is reached. Right between that time, Iran provides logistical support.
Okay.
The Quds Force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, like they do in with Hezbollah, or like they did in a way, I guess, with the Palestinian resistance or the Iraqi resistance, they go in and they give them blueprints and they give them information. And maybe during those years, they managed to send weapons or to send material to build all of these things. But more than anything, they give them, like I said, logistical information and blueprints on how to do this. They teach them, right? They teach them how to develop their own weapons. Since the start of the U.S. Of the Israeli genocide in Gaza until this day, I find it very, very hard to believe that Iran has managed to get any shipment of anything into Yemen, because Yemen had been under a blockade. Between 2022 May, I think, when the ceasefire is reached and the Gaza genocide, you had humanitarian shipments entering Yemen via Hodeidah. These humanitarian shipments needed to get clearance from Djibouti, from a UN clearance mission in Djibouti. And more often than not, after getting UN clearance, these ships would be grabbed by the Saudi Navy in the Red Sea, taken to Jeddah, rechecked, sent back down to Yemen if they decided. And if not, they just kept it, right? It was really a toss-up. Sometimes they would reach them, sometimes they wouldn't. This was what was happening back then. Since then, it's, to me, it's impossible to believe that Iran has managed to get anything to Yemen, because Yemen shares two borders, one with Saudi Arabia and one with Oman, right? And the one with Oman is next to the areas that are controlled by the Saudi-led coalition. So no, what Yemen has managed to achieve over these years is homegrown. Their arsenal is homegrown. They have, like I said, they were in war for about 7 years straight. And during these 7 years, they were bombed relentlessly, Jamal. Like, honestly, the images we were seeing in Gaza last year, or even, this week, what was happening in Yemen was just as bad, if maybe not even worse, because of the amount that was being dropped. It was like a bomb a minute or something like that. It was very similar to what happened in Gaza. And during this time, Saudi Arabia doesn't achieve anything. They don't achieve defeat. They don't remove Ansar Allah from Sana'a. They don't diminish their military capabilities. They, like I said, they continue getting attacked to the point that they are forced into a ceasefire. Saudi Arabia is pushed into accepting a ceasefire because just things are not looking good. Remember, this war was supposed to last 2 weeks when it was announced, and it ended up lasting 7 years.
Obama gave it the green light. That's right.
Exactly. Obama giving the green light, indeed. And then, so Yemen, what do they have? They have underground tunnels, like any other resistance faction. They have everything that they have and they do is underground. And second of all, any attack that they have launched against Israel or Western ships, it's their own. Is of their own creation. Is of their own, devising. They build these missiles. They are launching them. They are, where are they getting the material from? Maybe they already had it. Maybe they already had it from years back, or maybe they're getting it from somewhere else. But like I said, it's very hard to believe that Iran is the one that is, sending all of these missiles and they're getting into Yemen right now. There's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way, especially now that this is happening. Same with the drones, right? Because the Yemeni drones are truly the nightmare. It's not the missiles that scare the U.S. Navy and others. It's the drones that they are able to send, which are essentially their own version of the Iranian drones. Because again, the Iranian planners, they go, they teach them, they show them, they give them, experts, and then essentially tell them, go and do your thing. Now you have
This is how you build it.
That's what we're seeing today.
I'm fascinated by that because it's so unexpected, and that makes it because I guess my memory of Yemen is what you're talking about with the war with Saudi Arabia, where it was like the poorest country suffering famine and on untold levels during that war, and they went from that to here's a hypersonic missile landing in Tel Aviv, and it's like okay,
even the
that
United
is fascinating.
States, its biggest battle since World War II. I mean,
it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Esteban, man, I always appreciate having you. I always appreciate these conversations. Esteban Carrillo, he's an Ecuadorian journalist, currently writing for The Cradle, previously with Telesur English. My man, be safe, Esteban. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Jamal. We'll talk next time. Bye-bye.
Absolutely. You have a good one. Be safe. All right. Shout out to Esteban. Deeply appreciate him having conversations with me. There are several videos that I must play and that we must talk about. Before I go to those videos, I want to send a shout out to the chat. We'll go with Steve Tuckhouse. Good guess, good analysis. Well, thank you. And I would tell him. I believe that was either for Esteban or it was for Demetri. I don't know which one it was, but both guests were fantastic. We have Cherie, we have Bruce Hannaford, Jack Klugman, Maxwell Sterling, Neil Curie. We have a fantastic crowd out. Shout out to all of you. I was watching, so two things. Trump has released the JFK files. I have not had the opportunity to go through those files. I will be super curious whether there will be things that are blacked out, where they're like not for public consumption, despite the fact that they're being released, and whether they give a different take on the events, because I don't buy this idea of a man with one gun making those shots that precise, with the maneuvers that he had to do with that gun in order to go back and shoot again and maintain his level of precision. I don't buy it. I just don't buy it. Whether the CIA was involved or anything else, I don't know. I know RFK Jr. believes that something nefarious went on, which is the reason that he pushed Trump to release the files. This is pertinent to him and his family. And one of the key things that he wanted out of Trump in order to get his support was, you must release the files. I need to see the files. It would be very curious on whether anything comes out of those files that changes what is the common narrative of events in regards to the JFK assassination. So there's that. We also have Zelensky going rogue. Right here. This is Zelensky at a press conference repudiating everything that Donald Trump has effectively said that they agree with Russia on, especially around the issue of territorial integrity.
So far, the Russians are not showing that they're ready to finish the war. With regard to the Crimean territory, that would be one of the sensitive and complex issues at the future. The first step is one thing. Ceasefire, of course, we need to cross some grounds to get there in order to have quiet sky and quiet seas. So they are the correct steps if we want to end the war with a just peace. And then we'll be moving to other questions. Amongst them, of course, would be territory questions.
Dude, you've lost the war. Zelensky is saying this as his people are trapped right now in Kursk, Don't take my word for it. Reuters pointed it out in brutal, blunt details. They are trapped in Kursk. Full stop. Thousands of men are about to lose their lives as they're being bombed, shot, droned relentlessly. They cannot get out. They cannot get support. They cannot contact headquarters. They are trapped and will be destroyed. As Mendevev says, methodically and methodically and mercilessly destroyed. Those were his words. That is what's going to happen. And you are standing here as the loser of a war, claiming what you want and what you don't want, as if you have any choice in the matter. Your funder has said he wants this over with. If he's serious about it, he can cut your funding at any moment, cut your support, cut your intelligence, leave your people out there with their ass hanging out. Control is not a thing that you have at your disposal in the moment. And as I keep pointing out, I suspect Donald Trump's main thing is, I need to get rid of him. He is an impediment to anything I am trying to accomplish by making statements just like this. You go and have a conversation with the principal in Moscow, President Putin. In that, you come out with the fig leaf of, we are not going to hit energy systems. And Ukraine immediately comes out and hits the energy system. He is an issue. He is a problem. He is not on board for this process. He is accepted, almost in an ethereal sense, this war. And in order to end this war, Trump is going to have to do something about Zelensky. Zelensky has to go by hook or by crook. You must get rid of him and put in somebody who is more amenable to come into an assessment that is more in line with what you think. Now, as Mark pointed out, that is a problem for Russia. If you're talking about denazifying Ukraine, you're not talking about putting in another collaborator, in a sense, Nazi collaborator. You're talking about putting in a new government that is not full of these banderites. You're talking about something else. It is not enough to just get rid of Zelensky. That government needs to be pulled up root and branch in order for anything new to happen in a political space that is more in line and amenable with an actual view of Ukraine. I hope that makes sense. Zelensky is a problem, but it's not just Zelensky. Even if you got rid of Zelensky and you put in somebody who is still part of the, as they call them, band of Nazis, or if you want to say neo-Nazis or far-right Ukrainians, whatever you want to call them, you still run into the same problem. If you're trying to solve this for a generation, you need to get rid of all of them. They need to be out of power. And that is not just Zelensky. That is the person under Zelensky, Yermak. That is Zelensky, if he comes into play. That is any of these people. They need to go. Now, the reality is, though, that just like in the United States, where many of these Republicans don't agree with Trump policy, but goes along with that policy, he may be able to find some yes man in Ukraine that is willing to do it, which would create complications. Because, again, part of Russia's negotiation is denazifying Ukraine, and by that, a new government, and a government not of these people, which is the reason why Demetri pointed out, okay, they may need to go to Kiev, meaning the Russians may actually need to go to Kiev in order to resolve it politically, in a political sense, where you have effectively won the war outright because the Ukrainian forces have collapsed. Zelensky is not helping Donald Trump's goal in this moment. Zelensky needs to go. They are going rogue. And I'm saying Zelensky is going rogue because he's effectively repudiating everything Trump says. Trump is like, yeah, we agree on most of this stuff. The majority of it, we agree on. Okay, that would mean territorial concessions. That would mean Ukraine not being part of NATO. Maybe Trump disagrees with a portion of it that says, a new government. Who knows? But I suspect that the parts that they agree on, territorial integrity questions, Russia's not giving up the territory, off the table. And you can't do anything about it, which is wild to me that you have him coming out saying this is a red line. Okay, tell me more about your red lines from the position of losing a war. tell me more about that. The other thing, Chuck Schumer. Schumer is effectively arguing, and he may not be wrong, right here. Okay, right here. I'll play it. Now, I haven't seen this clip. I'm going by what is featured in the write-up on it. But Schumer has been getting a lot of heat. A lot of heat. Deserved, by the way, heat. Because Schumer led his party down this garden path that he was going to shut the government down in opposition to the continuing resolution that was coming out of the House. He had the power to do it if he was going to use the filibuster to just gum up the works. I'm not going to allow this to go through. Democrats in the House was like, do it, shut it down. Which is a wild place for Democrats to be in, because usually they're the ones who are saying they don't want the government to be shut down. But in this case, they were screaming for the shutdown. You get to the Senate, Schumer's like, we're going to shut it down. We're not going to accept this. This is unacceptable. We're going to stand up to Trump. And behind the scenes, it was understood that they were not going to do this. They were not going to shut it down, despite all of this gyrations towards him pretending that they were going to do this. Schumer goes up and capitulates all at once. We can't shut it down. Shutting it down is worse. And while I need to stand up for, whatever, I capitulate. Anger, fervor, screaming, yelling, outrage from his own caucus at two things. One, being led down the path, the plank that way. And then after being led down the plank and getting queued up for something to be walked back. It's humiliating. It makes your party look like it's in shambles, which is a clear reflection of what is reality at that point. Schumer goes on to explain this and to justify this. This is him.
Angered by, and we've seen it described as a civil war, as a train wreck. Many Democrats believe, if you have a government shutdown that will force President Trump and Republicans to the negotiating table, why not use your vote to push back and fight?
Because the idea that they would go to the negotiating table is they don't do it. This is a new group. This is not the old group. Let me explain. I knew when I took this vote, there'd be a lot of protests, but I felt I had to do it for the future, not only of the Democratic Party, but the country. Because as bad as that CR bill was, and it was bad, a shutdown is 10 times worse. Let me give you what happens.
Been blamed on the Democrats.
And you're right, Gail. But can I just explain
what? You had been saying you were not going to vote. I think people were upset with you, and people are very upset with you because you had led people to believe that, no, I'm going to vote against.
Okay, well, let me explain why first the shutdown is terrible. People ought to know that.
Now, Schumer points out we will get blamed if we did this. They would blame us. They would say that we were at fault. They would say Democrats were the ones that were responsible for shutting down the government. And his argument is, look, they won't negotiate with us on this. He said it in the very beginning. Yeah, in the old days, the Republicans might have felt some pressure because the government was closed and that it was their government because they had the House, the Supreme Court, Senate, Republican, House of Representatives, and Supreme Court and presidency. That they may feel pressure on them because it's their job to keep the government open, considering they have all of the houses and the presidency. But they're not going to negotiate with me. That's his point. We are not. This is not going to be a situation where they feel pressured to reopen the government. Trump is going to do what Trump does. Elon Musk is going to do what Elon Musk does. While the government is closed, Elon Musk is not a government worker in that sense. He is going to keep working and doing what he does. And so, A, we're getting blamed. B, they're not negotiating with us, which means this could go on for months. So we are in a weaker position in this. And shutting it down is a worse outcome than keeping it open. People's issue, though, more than anything else, is that he pretended as if he was going to do it and then didn't do it. And Schumer seems to miss that point over and over again when this comes up. It's yes, that you capitulated. Yeah, there's that. But they're going after you for capitulating because you pretended as if you weren't going to capitulate. Schumer doesn't seem to get that very basic point as he goes gallivanting around the country, defending the fact that he capitulated in the humiliating or most humiliating way possible. What Schumer is responding to, at least what I think it is his base wants them to fight. But they don't know what fight means, which is Schumer's issue. There is no substance. There's no core. They've reshaped themselves into what Garland calls a cult, and I'll accept it. I'll use that. A cult that is effectively a money laundering operation masquerading as a political party. And because they're masquerading as a political party, they've decided that Donald Trump is the thing to which they need to affiliate and organize themselves around. But that is not the same thing as having substance. Substance is different. Substance is, I have a value set that I'm going to fight for, promote, and that value set is leading me to try to get various political objectives accomplished. And in trying to get those political objectives accomplished, how I maneuver in this political space, how I maneuver in the world, the things that I push for, the things that I fight on, that guides me. That's not what's happening right now. What is happening is they want us to fight back against Trump. We have no way of doing that in real terms, short of shutting the government down, oddly enough. And otherwise, we're going to be slow walked. They're getting slow walked. The public hates them. The public doesn't understand what they're doing. They seem to be in shambles. They are in shambles. But I guess I'm trying to point to the point that the reason they're in shambles is because there's no organizing principle to which they are working on. And I would argue the reason they lost is because there's no organizing principle to which they're working on. It's one thing when you're fighting for the working class and they see you're fighting for working class and they see it because of what you're doing, what you're saying, what you're moving on, what you're signaling to people that you care about in regards to your priorities. That is different than what they are and what is happening right now. And they don't seem to fully be aware of that. What they seem to think is it's messaging, because that's what they seem to have thought for all of these years. That's what they've become so accustomed to. And when they came in contact with Trump, well, in their minds, okay, well, the issue is still messaging. We're still the party of the working class. We're still the ethical group that got civil rights into the mainstream and got it to be this kind of established order as what it is now, even if Trump doesn't necessarily like that. It is what it is, what it is. And I don't even think he's necessarily pushed back against it. It's not like he's going after gay issues or black issues. I know DEI, but DEI, I think it's a little bit different, but whatever. I'm saying that they have become so accustomed to the way to which they operate that they can't accommodate the fact that the way in which they operate is no longer valid. There's no core. That is the issue. And yeah, that is my refrain. And I would stick with that. They have no core. And because they have no core, they don't know what to go back to as an organizing principle in order to push back against Trump. You're in a rebuilding phase. You have to accept that. It is what it is. The American public has found you to be lacking and found you to be so lacking that they're willing to put in somebody like Trump in order to make the point that much clearer. You are found wanting. You have to do something with that. Schumer is just the outward expression of what I'm just saying. That's all. Democrats are hitting him on it. Schumer is bewildered by it. They don't know what to do about it. And I'm saying the reason you don't know what to do about it is because there's no other organizing principle short of Trump that guides behavior, guides actions, guides words. It's not there. It's a cult that is purely a funding mechanism for a political party that has fundamentally lost the plot and has fundamentally lost the way. They don't know what to do. They're in a quagmire. They're in utter shambles. Schumer is just a visible experiential representation of that. This clip is amazing. This clip is amazing. There's another issue on this too that feeds into this. Gaza. Schumer went on TV and has repeated various propaganda on the issue. And of course, he in order to do this, and I would wager to you there's not going to be any pushback on this, despite the fact that this is completely false. It is shown to be false. And yet Schumer completely repeats it.
It was really never that bad until 2017. And until October 7th last year.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden,
When the Jews were attacked
when the
by
Jews were
Hamas.
attacked by Hamas
Right.
initially, and the women raped, and the little babies' heads chopped off, and all of that, brutal.
That didn't happen. That didn't happen. Also, I want to point out Israelis were attacked that just so happened to be Jews. That is different than saying Jews were attacked. Israelis were attacked because Israel is occupying Gaza. That's why they were attacked. The notion that you would say things weren't that bad to October 7th, you're out of your mind. You're out of your mind. I would wager to you that the people on the ground who were living under Israeli occupation will not come to the assessment that things were not that bad. Otherwise, October 7th wouldn't have happened if indeed things were not that bad. I'm making the point of saying this idea of, well, things weren't that bad until October 7th. You're wrong. You're out of your mind. You're lying. You're taking a certain point of view as a Zionist. So everything was great. They weren't. You were in an apartheid state running an open air ghetto. That is what is taking place right now. That is what has been taking place. So this notion of, oh, things were great until October 7th, wrong. Jews were attacked. They were Jews, but they were Israelis that just so happened to be Jews. They weren't attacked because they were Jewish. They were attacked because they were occupying. There's a difference in those things. And beheaded babies show it. Women raped, even the New York Times couldn't find it. They would have been happy to find it. Couldn't find it. Chuck Schumer is making this up. I'm saying this is part of the problem. The Democratic Party was perfectly fine with funding and backing a genocide for a year and a half. And yet wouldn't even talk about it, wouldn't even bring a Palestinian on the stage. And I strongly suspect that many of the people that were fired on MSNBC, Democratic Network, were fired because they were covering this issue as tepidly as they were covering it. Mehdi Hassan was hitting it harder. I'm pointing out that Joy Reid and some of the other people that were covering the issue in the tepid fashion in which they were covering it were fired because that level of dissent was not allowed, not permitted by the party itself. And yes, MSNBC is an arm of the Democratic Party. They funded, Joe Biden spent like 70 or 80% of the murders, the killings that Israel was going through was funded by Joe Biden, backed by the Democratic Party that wouldn't say anything against it. That is a problem. A lot of people that did not show up, millions, did so because of this issue. They just stayed home. The Muslim community ended up voting for Trump because of this issue. They either voted for Trump or stayed home. Democrats did not get that vote. That vote was necessary. All of those votes were necessary, considering they lost millions of people who just didn't show up because they didn't see anything to show up for. And you would come on and continue this lying Zionist propaganda that you are effectively running with and that the party is effectively backed, either implicitly or explicitly. This is a problem. The majority of the run and file Democrats think either a genocide is taking place, either Israel has gone too far, or Israel is effectively a murderous regime. To have the leadership coming out, taking a different tact than what most of the Democrats think is problematic to Democrats' operation and function as a political entity, considering most of your base disagrees with your assessment. All of these things are problems. All of these things bespeak of a political party that is fundamentally in shambles and at war with itself. You can call it a civil war, you can call it whatever you want to call it. I'm saying that there are fundamental problems with the Democratic Party that make it a non-viable vehicle of operation in regards to getting political objectives accomplished, whether it's on this issue, whether it's on the war issue in Ukraine, where they are still screaming to keep the war going, or whether it's on domestic priorities of increasing the minimum wage, defending and expanding Social Security, Medicare for all, and increasing medical capabilities of this country, even if it's a public option. But to push and fight for those items, those are not things that are on the board to fight for. Even when they passed that $300 for kids, something that was good, within a year, gone. Your party is broken, sir. You are just a living image, a living experiential picture of the fact that is indeed broken. It is not messaging. It is not you be capitulating in the moment. It is not you just losing to Donald Trump. All of those things are indicating something else that none of you are seeing because you are in such a bubble that you just cannot see outside of the fog of your own awesomeness in your own eyes. The American public doesn't see you that way. You may see yourself that way. They do not see you that way. Something needs to fundamentally change. It's not just leadership, it's the party itself. Will they become aware of that? I don't know. Should Chuck Schumer shut the government down? Who knows? I don't really care. That is not the key part of their issue. Shutting the government down is a specific item. The party is the issue. What it represents and what it doesn't represent is the issue. And until they get back to some level of basics, until they, have their come to Jesus moment, none of this changes anything. Trump may go too far. And you may have a situation of the public going back to Democrats because they feel that they didn't get what they want in Trump, and not just not get what they want, would actually go back to Democrats because they're pointing to something that Trump actually did. That doesn't say anything about the party itself, nor does it say any substance or anything else. It's purely a political move to try to regain political clout and political power. By the same token, the fact that a Republican won means a Republican can win, and somebody who's a better orator, better arbiter, better explainer than Trump, more sophisticated than Trump, could win. I put J.D. Vance in that box, believe it or not. Be aware. They're thinking that Trump's going to lose in the midterms, that he's going to go too far, that the public is going to want a restraint. And usually that does happen. But usually a Republican doesn't get the popular vote either. And you cannot depend upon that. And I don't want them to be able to win in the midterms if indeed nothing substantially has changed. I don't see anything changing. Chuck Schumer, the mainstay of your Democratic Party. And of course, there's also Bernie Sanders. I'm going to play part of this clip because I'm so annoyed with Sanders right now. He would give these speeches and conversations where he's bashing Democrats while simultaneously boosting Democrats, meaning when it matters, he boosts them. Oh, Joe Biden is the most, closest to FDR that we've had since FDR, since LBJ. And it's like, dude, that's not true. And yet he would say it with a straight face and send a huge amount of energy that he generates because he's likable. And he tends to be right when he's talking about this economic populism stuff. But to take that energy and take that power and then dump it into a Democratic Party that in no way believes that stuff is outrageous and doesn't help the cause in this case. He should be where I am and hitting that party to try to turn that party into an actual political vehicle to get things accomplished. And then he could say, FDR, he could do all that stuff. But you don't get there through support. You don't get there through support. Sanders, CNN.
Safe to say there's a lot of despair in the country over what Democrats are doing, how they're responding to this. You're an independent, but you caucus with the Democrats. I want you to listen to what happened at a town hall tonight with Democratic Congressman Glenn Ivey.
You aren't even working together on a shared strategy. And that is failure. We are not interested in hearing that you are in the minority. We know that. We want you to show some of the backbone and strategic brilliance that Mitch McConnell would have in the minority.
Is that what you've been hearing out on the road, Senator?
I think there's a lot of discontent with the Democratic leadership, and I think with the entire Democratic Party. And one of the things that I and Alexandria will be trying to do is get people involved in the political process, either as independents or as progressive Democrats, to stand up for a working class in this country, which is being hammered every single day. Real inflation accounted for wages have not gone up in 52 years, while the very richest people have become much richer. Our healthcare system is broken. Our housing system is broken. Our childcare system is broken. We're not making the progress we need to address the climate crisis that we face.
See, that's the rub with Sanders. Yes, all of that's true. All of that's true. But there is no political vehicle to do anything about it. And you sending people to the Democratic Party doesn't fix that issue. Doesn't fix that issue. I want to go to my guests. I am joined with the man himself, Mike Maloof. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years of federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, welcome to the show, my man. How you doing this morning? You doing okay?
I'm great, Jamal. Thanks so much.
Feeling better. Man, always appreciate having you. I'm just to lead into this. Give me your take on the conversations between Putin and Trump. Apparently, they talked yesterday for 2.5 hours. Both sides say that the conversation was positive. Russia and Trump agree on, and ostensibly Zelensky also agreed on a fig leaf ceasefire for 30 days on energy systems. Apparently, there were also agreements on the Black Sea. This was immediately violated by Ukraine, I guess, getting across the seriousness that they don't like this in these negotiations. But give me a take on this notion that the principals are talking, and this is after Witkoff went to Moscow, had a conversation with Putin, which was apparently also positive. What are your thoughts? What do you think this conversation is ultimately about? And the impact, by the way, of the conversation.
I think Trump and Putin have a much larger geostrategic vision other than just Ukraine. They are looking to reestablish their own spheres of influence once again and become strategic partners in a variety of areas, critical areas, where they can cooperate. And they're talking in terms of economic, political, and principally economic opportunities in terms of what they can do. Now, some folks believe the notion is to try and wean Russia away from China, but number one, I doubt that will happen. But number two, Trump himself has basically downplayed that notion, suggesting that he wants to work with Xi Jinping as well. So you got strategic partners here. These are the pachyderms of the world, and they're talking to one another. And the likes of a cog like Ukraine is nothing, and it's just a step toward trying to achieve this greater geostrategic vision for one another. Now, I just read just before I came on where the White House has ordered the various U.S. agencies to reestablish their ties with their Russian counterparts, CIA, Pentagon, State Department. That's big. This is a reopening. I mean, those relationships have been virtually frozen during the entire Biden administration. And so there's this opening up now of trying to regain that relationship. And I think it's going to be beneficial to the world. We've seen no evidence that Russia has grandiose designs to conquer Europe. At this point, who wants it? You know, and yet they're talking belligerency. They're talking war, and you know we fought 2 world wars on their behalf, and yet these are based on ancient feuds. Enough. We've seen the pattern of behavior now for a century that suggests they're not going to change. And the more we get embroiled with them, the more we get involved with them. That's why I believe once this strategic relationship is reestablished, and there's a variety of areas where they can have agreements, such as in strategic weaponry, lowering the nuclear threshold, and lessen the world tensions, I think you're going to see NATO begin to splinter up into fragments of itself, of more regional defense alliances over time. I think that's where it's going to be heading. It's not going to be an overnight thing, but I think eventually that's what it's going to do. Now, if this was the last year of Trump's administration, I'd say, nah, that's not going to happen. But his term is just beginning. I mean, he's got 4 years to make this all happen.
It's been 2 months. It feels like it's been longer. He's been hyperactive.
To the Democrats, it's been a total nightmare.
Right.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
I figure the problem for the Democrats is that what Trump is doing is making them look so bad that their only defense is to fight back and to fight but they don't come back with alternative proposals, and that's why they're going to continue losing. Period. Now that's a separate issue, but I've seen it in the bureaucracies when you as a civil servant did well and you did and your group exceeded the expectations and you got awards. It pissed off everybody else around you, so they want to lower you to their level so that you don't make them look bad. And that's what's happened. I mean, it's typical bureaucratic mindset.
Well, they are not looking great from the standpoint of the American public.
No,
CNN.
But look at the reaction to Musk and his achievement in retrieving those astronauts.
Yes.
He's still being condemned. I mean, that's success. You see, that's success. You cannot reward success. You got to try to cut it down. And that's what we're seeing, the negativity that's being espoused by the Democrats at this point. And I think it's a crying shame. We should be applauding it.
Yeah, those astronauts have been in there for months. And
but it was an achievement. It was apparently Musk had offered it to the Biden administration. It was turned down. The astronaut's brother yesterday said, "Well, there was always a standby capsule." No, there wasn't. If there was, why didn't they would have taken it?
Yeah, they would have used it. This is Zelensky repudiating everything that Donald Trump apparently is agreeing with Russia on. But fundamentally, it seems that Trump and Putin agree on the main contours of a deal. Like they agree on Ukraine is not going to be part of NATO. Territorial integrity, meaning Ukraine is going to have to give up territory, which most likely means Russia's going to keep the territory because Rubio keeps saying, look, there are realities that are on the ground that we're going to have to deal with. And those realities being Russia's put those territories into their constitution and don't plan on giving them up. Now, there may be also something I think we should hit on. What's fascinating to me is Trump put out a 30-day ceasefire agreement that he knew was going to get shot down. Russia wasn't going to stop. Everybody understood Russia was not going to stop. However, what started as a 30-day ceasefire offer has now turned into a track towards peace. So what started off as, okay, what about this 30-day ceasefire? It's, okay, well, we're not going to accept that. We're not going to stop fighting. We're going to keep moving. Those soldiers in Kursk will remain, basically, they're going to be destroyed or they're going to surrender. However, we will now engage in negotiations with the idea that there's been no agreement to stop anything on the battlefield. So what started off as a 30-day ceasefire turned into a token agreement with a diplomatic track while they still continue on the battlefield. That is not exactly what initially was offered, but that is what it ended up being. Give me your take on that. I mean, how do you see it? Or do you think I'm being too...
I have a slightly different take.
Please.
I think Putin agreed in principle to a 30-day ceasefire. You've got, and they're in the announcement yesterday, particularly from the Kremlin, the two sides were going to immediately get together in the Middle East to implement. Okay, someone's got to say, okay, at such and such a time, we're going to initiate this ceasefire. Boom, and that'll be between, that assumes that the United States has some say over Ukraine,
yes,
and their action. So far, they're not telegraphing that. They're not suggesting that they're going to go along with it, even though they pay lip service to the concept. But when you listen to the new Ukrainian foreign minister, it's almost as though you're talking to a different entity altogether. Yeah. So it sounds almost like the Ukrainian government is not unified in its in what it wants to say.
Yes.
Or you have a lot of rogues who are in government. The other thing too is that,
by the way, including Zelensky.
It depends upon what mood he's in.
Yeah.
You see, the other problem is potential is that even though he might agree to a ceasefire, the Azov group and all these other groups that have so much invested in war may recoil and go rogue. And I think that is a very likely possibility. And I think that Trump realizes that. I think and certainly Putin does. They're going to go ahead with their proposals, their agreements. If Zelensky decides to do his own, then I think Trump is basically going to suggest or say, without saying it, Russia, do your thing. And if the Europeans want to join in with Zelensky, it's on them. The U.S. will no longer be involved. I think that's where it's heading. I don't have a crystal ball, but certainly I think that what other options are there? The Europeans have openly expressed opposition to wanting to wage peace. They're talking about gaining more, acquiring more funds to carry on the conflict. They are hell-bent on war with Russia. And that goes back centuries.
Yeah.
Especially the UK. I mean, it's unbelievable. They have never gotten over the Crimean War and all, and the original British-Russian war, and times before that, back into the 18th and 18th and 17th centuries.
Yep.
When does it
They're
end?
doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing.
All over again, just different century.
When I was studying Napoleonic Wars, I was shocked at how it hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed.
You would get these countries, they would get it powerful, they would try to take over another country, and then they would lose a certain amount of power, and somebody would take over them, and they just go back and forth.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, dude,
you've
been doing this for centuries.
That's the beauty of history. You begin to see a pattern of behavior, and you know that what has been tried in the past didn't work.
Yeah.
Why don't we try something else? But they're not doing that. They're continuing on with their lemon approach and are going over the cliff once again. And they expect us to retrieve them. Once again, they were saying, well, we're gonna put in these troops, but we got to have strong U.S. backing. Oh no, we're not going that route anymore. That's nonsense. For what?
Well, that's them trying to destroy the peace process.
Of course.
I would say this is the reason why they're being babysit by Kellogg in that part of the peace process. I
remind people the UK is no bigger than the state of Indiana. Get over it. You're no longer an empire.
Yep. Well, they seem to think that they are.
Oh, yeah.
And Zelensky, listen to what he says here. I think this one is in English. The other one was in English. I hope this one is.
First of all, any negotiations, it's a very it's a chance to finish the war. So far, the Russians are not showing that they're ready to finish the war. With regard to the Crimean territory, that would be one of the sensitive and complex issues at the future. The first step is one thing. Ceasefire, of course, we need to cross some grounds to get there in order to quiet sky and quiet seas. So they are the correct steps if we want to end the war with a just peace. And then we'll be moving to other questions.
He seems to be under a mistaken idea that the loser of a conflict gets to dictate what happens after they lose. This notion that, oh, we're going to have quiet skies and then talk about other items, he's out of his mind. Russia is going to keep moving and putting more and more pressure on the Ukrainian military up until the point where that military collapses if they don't come to a deal before that. Trump knows that, which is the reason why Trump is like, you need a deal now, because at some point your military will buckle. I mean, like, this is nonsense. Russia is not going to stop when they have the military edge and advantage on all sectors of the battlefield. And at this point, he's like, yeah, Crimea is complicated. No, it's not. It's in Russian hands. It's going to stay in Russian hands. It's considered Russian territory. It's going to remain that way.
Yeah.
Like, it's amazing to me that Trump and Putin can talk about this stuff, come to some kind of general idea, and then Zelensky comes out and just blows it to hell. Trump is going to need his own man in Ukraine in order to make this stick, right? Meaning, is he going to be enough to stop this deal from coming through, whatever deal they come up with?
If you listen to Zelensky, it's almost as though he realizes his butt is on the line, and he's got to really worry about internal opposition. And he talks in generalities and platitudes. And if you read the body language and you read between the lines of what he's saying, he acknowledges that calm seas and air is important, because that's one of the proposals on the table for as part of the terms of the ceasefire. Putin has already at least partially agreed not to hit energy infrastructure, and he ordered that within minutes following the conversation with Donald Trump, and Witkoff confirmed that.
Mm-hmm.
So Putin has already displayed some sense of giving in, and that's an important thing to preserve the energy infrastructure of Ukraine and not destroy it completely, even though they're fully capable. They're fully capable of destroying the whole thing and turning the place into back to the Stone Age if they want to. But that's not what he's proposing. In fact, he's proposing just the opposite. And yet the Ukrainians, and especially Zelensky, I think due to internal pressures, is reluctant to acknowledge that for fear of what could happen to him personally. Yes. I think he needs to really call for elections and step down and get the hell out.
That's the other thing, right? Politically, could Zelensky even sign on the dotted line? Like, is there a man in a trench coat with a weapon waiting for Zelensky to sign that dotted line where it's like, dude, do it and it's your life?
Well, that's why you're hearing no. The answer is no. I mean, short answer is no. He there's already too much baggage with Zelensky, and he has too many. And Azov has already threatened him. In the past, they've already threatened him. You back off from hitting the Russians. You're not. Your life's in jeopardy, and they've made that clear to him. I think he needs to. But both Putin and Trump have called for early elections in Ukraine so they can reestablish legitimacy in that country. And Putin has also made it clear he doesn't want all of Ukraine. He says he wants Ukraine to exist. Okay, well, Western Ukraine will have something to deal with, and that is the pickings by Poland and Lithuania, historical desires to regain territories that they once had. For example, the Galicia area of Western Ukraine. Poland once had that. That was all part of Poland at one time. And they got Polish-speaking people in that region. They're going to want to have their pickings. That's why you see Poland so out in front on the eastern front of NATO, trying to wage this conflict to protect Ukraine, because they have vested interest, and they see the instrument of NATO being their ability to gain what they want politically.
But I mean, do you really see two things? One, do you really see Europe invading Ukraine in that way? And two, would the Russians even accept that? I mean, from their point of view, they're even pointing out that UK troops or French troops in Ukraine is a no-go. It's like, this is a non-starter. NATO is not going into Ukraine. From their point of view, how would that be different than NATO going into Ukraine?
Well, Putin has made it very clear he doesn't want them in there, period. You don't need them. You really don't need them. This is their way of trying to assert. You see, the Europeans have a real problem. They have an identity problem. They feel insignificant in the big powers talk because they're not part of the agenda. They're not part of the group.
Right.
They're left behind in the dust, and they can't stand it. They're looking for relevancy, and this is what is really coming through to me, at least. That you got Macron, who himself politically is in deep trouble. So what do you do when you have domestic internal problems? You look outward to create a crisis to try and unify your country. And that's basically what he's doing. He's talking about now putting nuclear weapons on the border with Germany, maybe becoming the new nuclear umbrella for Europe. You can see where they're pulling away from NATO themselves and looking more toward an independent European defense alliance. And that is going to bring up competition once again, old 19th and 18th century competition between the French and the British all over again. I can see it happening. I mean, this goes on and on and on. Napoleon, where are you? Let's dust off the war plans. You know, I mean, it's here we go again.
Do you really see Europe doing that without America? I mean, like,
they
as somebody told me, desperate people do desperate things.
Oh yeah, well, they're going to go through a semblance of it. Yeah, they recognize that the United States is peeling away. The old post World War II agenda is archaic. It's over. We have moved on. But to move on, what do you if they had reestablished the defense alliance as a true defense alliance, but not against any country in particular, but to defend yourselves against any internal type of thing. But what happened was that you had the EU and all of these guys wanting to become a supranational group to take over the sovereignty of individual countries, and those countries are recoiling. So they've done it to themselves. It's all about the aggrandizement of power, and Brussels is the new capital of Europe, and never mind the capitals of like Paris or London, they're subservient now to Brussels of all places. Mm-hmm. The little statue kid peeing in the fountain, you know, and that's their claim to fame. So besides having NATO headquarters there.
They have good chocolate.
Yeah, they have
that's the best I can say. They have good chocolate.
Yeah, I like Dutch chocolate better than I do Belgian chocolate.
Yeah, Belgian chocolates. Fair enough. And I guess the last question: do you think they're going to be able to gum up the works in a peace process? I mean, Taylor, do you think they're going to be able to gum up the works in a peace process? I mean, the very act of threatening that kills negotiations if it's not getting a full repudiation from Trump. And up to this point, Trump hasn't necessarily said, he has said, you're not going to get a backstop from us. But I haven't heard him stress this idea of you are on your own if you do this. We will leave you to your devices. You will be fighting the Russians on your own if you do this, which I think on some level is required. I think they really believe that Donald Trump, if they went in, and they will get destroyed by the Russians, because you can't allow a nose in a camel's tent. Right, like the moment that you put those troops in, nothing, then you've allowed to put in more troops in that sense. If they believe, and this is the part where desperate men do desperate things, they have gotten themselves so wrapped up into this idea of a war that even when the U.S. is pulling out, they're like, we need a coalition of the willing to go in. Italy has said no, hell no, and Maloney is like, we're not doing this. We're not.
Well, there goes NATO unity.
Exactly. Germany at one point said no, but we need to see what the new chancellor has to say. They fractured. It's not this coalition of NATO in the way that you would think. that this is breaking down. You're right. They fracture into these kind of, okay, coalitions of the willings to do this.
Yeah.
I guess my thing is, if they do, I guess two things. One, do you think they're going to do this? Or do you think they will even be willing to do this without the backstop from Trump, under the belief that if they are attacked, that the U.S. will get involved? And two, are they correct in that assessment that the U.S. would get involved if those European troops gets slaughtered, which they will, by the way?
Yeah, I just don't see the U.S. coming to the assistance. Trump has made that clear, and he will not say it out directly, but by his actions of moving ahead, of going over them, and pushing them to the side while he makes strategic arrangements with Russia directly and on a bilateral basis, I think is a very significant signal to the Europeans that they are secondary or even tertiary. Russia doesn't even want to deal with it. They're not even interested in what the Europeans have to say in terms of a peace plan. So that just shows you how they have been relegated to insignificance. Europe, all of Europe. And why? Because they can't find their ass with both hands. And they've made that very clear. And you see them groping around now. And they cannot, they are broke. They're in recession, and yet they want to commit to war. For what? And against Russia? Why?
Yeah.
And you see, why don't they worry about looking to internally develop them and refurbish their own industries and develop and regain their quality of life that they had prior to the SMO in 2022? No, that's not their. And you got a country such as Russia, which before that time was giving them very cheap energy. Why not just reestablish that? Russia has no designs on taking Europe. There's no evidence of that. Now, if Lithuania and what have you who are members of NATO want to have internal battles, internal political conflicts, and they decide to want to get out of NATO, well, that's their internal decision. Of course, that will be looked upon as a gain for Russia, but so be it. I mean, the people have spoken. But yet you don't see Europe wanting to retain democracy, and they've never really been democratic as such. And not in the sense of what the U.S. envisions as what is democracy, freedom of speech and what have you. We see that their notion of democracy is different than ours, and I think that's what also brought about the Vance comments, the criticisms, and the Europeans were just beside themselves. But yet they backed Ukraine, and it's under martial law, and they are going after the religious types. They're going after it internally inside of Ukraine. They're rounding people up, kidnapping them to draft them into the military. I mean, they're so contrary to our principles of democracy that you have to question what they really mean by being a democratic country, and what holds what is the cohesion, the glue that holds us all together that has dried up like glue. It dried
Romania
up.
is a really good example. I mean,
Romania is a perfect example.
Yeah. One last question. I'm sorry, I lied. One more question. This Putin pointed out during his conversation with Donald Trump, look, we want a ceasefire. That is perfectly fine. We want to end the war. We need to attend to the main items that started the war in the first place, NATO expansion being one of the main ones. He pointed out this territorial integrity issue. Effectively, we're not giving back what we took in these are Russian territories. But he also pointed out, if indeed we reached a point where we can have a ceasefire and we can end hostilities, there still needs to be a way to ensure that the mechanism of the ceasefire is in place. Basically, we're not having mints again. We're not doing it. We did that twice. We're not doing it again. You guys did not attend to the agreement, so we don't trust you. And so this question comes up: how would they even ensure that the tenets of the ceasefire are kept, if indeed they come to? Meaning, I think for the Russians, if they see, okay, the ceasefire is going to lead to a long-term resolution because we've accomplished our military objectives and we are getting what we want, how do they ensure that this is not another Minsk 3? And I don't have an answer for that.
This is a little complicated, but here goes. I think Trump recognizes that he has no control over Zelensky, and Zelensky will do what he wants to do. Look, just at the time they were having a phone call, Zelensky attacked Belgorod in Russia while the conversation was ongoing. What Trump is trying to achieve is a strategic agreement between the United States and Russia. And any peace deal with Ukraine is incidental. And if after he's established that relationship and he can get at least a ceasefire going, it'll be mission accomplished for Trump. And if the Europeans then and the Ukrainians want to go at it again and create their own mischief, it's going to be without the United States. And I think that is what Trump is. I think that's where it's heading without saying as much. But I think that's inevitably where it's going to go. And I think the image is there. We're seeing it. They've agreed on almost everything they want to do between Trump and Putin in terms of a settlement between the United States and Russia, and reestablishing relationships and what have you, and entering into more bilateral disarmament talks. Again, this is absent any settlement with of Ukraine. Ukraine is incidental. Now, if he can at least get the ceasefire, but then Zelensky and his hordes decide to go contrary to that and initiate and go contrary to the ceasefire arrangement, it's on them. Mm-hmm. And if the Europeans want to join in, it's up to them. But the United States will not back it. And I think that's where it's going to go.
Are you optimistic about the peace process, or you don't buy it?
Well, you don't know unless you try. And up until now, nothing else has worked. So at least you try, and hoping that you get something. But if these guys are so locked in on their approach of wanting to have war, it's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy for them. If you're going to be doing what you need to do to go back and wage conflict, you inevitably will have that conflict. And that's what I'm seeing happening here at the hands of the Europeans. And the Brits just can't seem to help themselves. I mean, they're suicidal. It's just suicidal. Yeah. They've come up with no other alternative. They had 4 years to work out a peace agreement, but chose to go to war instead. They have no alternatives, and they still haven't come up with one, even though they're very critical of what Trump and Putin are trying to achieve. Mm-hmm. Yet they have no viable alternative in its place. So they need to just shut up and sit down.
Michael Maloof. Michael Maloof is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of Secretary of Defense, author, regular contributing analyst on RT and other media outlets. He has nearly 30 years federal service experience in the U.S. Department of Defense. Michael, thank you, my man. I really appreciate these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamal. Bye-bye.
You have a good one. Be safe. All right, yeah, and we'll see what happens. Europe is a bit rich to me that Europe started 2 world wars, and now they're trying to start a 3rd. And it takes America to try to calm them down and say, hey, this is a bad idea, don't do this. And yet they still keep egging this on, keep pushing on this. It's as if they've become so stuck on this particular policy. And maybe it's because the people who are pushing those policies now can't backtrack from those policies. And so they continue to escalate and escalate and escalate, missing the fact that you've lost. You've lost. At some point, you need to accept that. Unless you're going to be going to nuclear war, you need to accept the fact that you lost. And if the U.S. is not going to give the backstop, and the British military can't fight, I think Colin called them a bunch of soccer hooligans, then you have to, at some level, accept that you were not capable of manipulating reality in the way that you thought you could. You have failed. Full stop. You failed. So will they accept that? I don't know. They are continuing right now to gum up the works in regards to any peace process. Trump, up to this point, has isolated them and has sent Kellogg to babysit. Zelensky has gone to Europe because he was treated poorly by Trump in his mindset. But the reality of it is, Trump has effectively said, yeah, get negotiations going. Those negotiations are going to go as the military campaign proceeds, just like it typically does, especially by the side that's winning, when the side that's winning don't want to stop winning. Trump has seemed to accept this peace tunnel that is happening. I strongly suspect a lot of this, and the hard part for this is getting Ukraine on board, finding somebody that will sign on the dotted line that Russia would consider as legitimate, and get Europeans on board, where all of these groups, NATO, Europe, Zelensky, say, we surrender, even though it will be put in other terms. And what Trump wants goes beyond Ukraine, and Ukraine is a chip on the board that he can play in regards to the large context of negotiations that I suspect he wants to have with Russia. And again, I'll say it again, the reason is because if you isolate your negotiations to Ukraine, well, you've already lost that war. And so you don't really have much leverage in a war that you've already lost. Okay, maybe if you add in other stuff, okay, we have missiles in this country, maybe we'll move them. Hey, let's have a conversation about Nord Stream pipeline. Maybe we'll do something on that. Oh, also, and we're now bringing in Ukraine into this in regards to what we also may want to put on the table for some level of negotiations. Maybe Putin will agree to X or Y. Who knows? I guess my point is, whatever conversation takes place had to be larger than Ukraine. And the hardest part of that conversation, I strongly suspect, will be A, trying to look strong as US president while you negotiate something that you effectively lost. B, getting the Ukrainians and getting the Europeans on board with whatever you come up with and whatever dance you're doing in order to work your way into them saying, okay, we sign on to this. Even if it's France and UK abstaining in the UN Security Council on whatever you put up with in the UN Security Council to get signed. It's going to be a dance. It's going to be strange looking. And Trump is going to have to work his way into getting Europe and Ukraine to agree to whatever the US comes up with. Even if at the end of it all, he just walks. All right, I can't get you gang of goofballs to agree. Fair enough. I'm not going to sit here and negotiate forever. I tried. I'm restoring diplomatic relations with Russia. They did negotiate with me in good faith. You all didn't accept what we were putting down. We were the main proponents of this war. We've now pulled out. Figure it out on your own. That is the ultimate nuclear option that he always has at his disposal. They would get screaming out of Europe. You get screaming at certain political classes in the US. His base will back him, and I would even go so far as to say the American public will probably back him. He could do it. He doesn't want to do it. He could do it. Right now, he is playing in the context of Ukraine is still fighting. We can still send support to keep ships on the board. So when we negotiate with Russia, we have something there to which to negotiate with on some level. Like, we'll see. I could be wrong. This could be, overtly, cautiously optimistic. We'll see it play out. We'll see it play out together. Let's go to the chat before we close it. Okay, Google is on something weird. Steve Talks, good guess, good analysis. Thank you, Steve Talks. Edgar Grana, welcome to the family. And weirdly enough, Edward Grana, welcome to the family again. I don't know why it's doing that. I don't know why I put you in twice. Welcome to the family both times. Thank you for joining. As for our chat, let's see. Okay, people are having all sorts of conversations. Jano Choi, shout out to you. Sir Night, Alexander G, Dwep, Craig Wolf, Cherie, Arcane Eclectic, Navy Veteran, all of you Shout out to all of you. Thank you for joining me. Look, you all, if you really dig this content, in closing, you can support it through PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, memberships, Super Stickers. All of those things are accepted. All of those things helps the show function. And you have my deepest appreciation for all of it. Hit the like button, share the video. Again, all of those things deeply help the show. As I said, the YouTube algorithm. Buy me a cup of coffee, as people say. I'm going to close. Thank you all for joining me on this great show, great guests. Maloof, Demetri Lascaris, Esteban. They all have my thank you for it. You all have a fantastic day. And I will see you on tomorrow, Thursday. Jesus, Thursday morning. Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Signing off. Have a good one, all. Be safe. See you in the morning. Actually, Garland and I will be doing the show this evening. We typically do it at 4. I may need to push because I have a doctor's appointment that's going to run a bit late today. But we will be here this evening. Check us out. Garland, Jamal, that show usually goes very well. The people seem to love it. And so we're going to be doing it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. 4 p.m. is the time that we're setting it for. Today might need to be at 5, but we'll see. We'll play it by ear. But definitely check us out. That show is fantastic. You all have a good one. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you this evening and then tomorrow morning.